So in this compendium, I've combined 5 separate videos on taking you from zero to hero when it comes to working inside Elementor. So if you are new to this platform and you want to go from learning the basics through all the key skills you need right the way up to building more advanced websites using tools like advanced custom fields, custom post types and so on, then this is going to be the perfect compendium for you. However, if there's only certain bits and pieces you want to watch, there's a full and utter timestamp in the description below that will take you to every single stage throughout this entire video. So if you want to jump around, you can do that. If you need to jump back, you can do that. If you want to skip pieces out, you can do that as well. What I do hope is that by the end of this video, you will feel like you've got a good solid foundation in this fantastic page builder inside WordPress and ready to start building your own websites. As always though, if you've got any comments, questions, or you want some support, I'd recommend taking a look at the free Facebook group. I'll put a link in the description. You can jump over, join up to that, no cost whatsoever. And if you want help and support from like-minded people, then there's tons of that available to you. Well anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope to see you over on our Facebook group. And if you've got any questions, there's the comment section down below. So for this part of the tutorial, we're going to be creating something that looks very similar to this. As you can see, it's a nice, clean, simple design and a great starting point to get you up to speed. So first of all, let's just take a quick look at what we've got set up inside WordPress itself. So if we come over first of all into the appearance and into themes, you can see that the theme that I'm going to be using for this example is the Hello theme. Now, first of all, I'm going to say the reason for this is because it is a bare bones theme that has pretty much just the things that WordPress needs to keep it happy. And then we can use Elementor and Elementor Pro to create all the different page design elements that we want. So in this tutorial, we're going to be using this. But however, if you wanted to use something else like GeneratePress, Ocean WP, Astra, and so on, you could use those, and all the skills you're going to learn in this series of videos should carry you over to pretty much whatever theme you want to use alongside Elementor and Elementor Pro. Next up, let's just jump over into the plugin section and see what plugins we currently have installed. So all I'm using is Elementor and Elementor Pro. That's all we need to install for this tutorial. Again, obviously you're probably going to find there's going to be additional plugins that you want to install to get your website up and running fully, things like SEO tools and so on. This is all about how you use Elementor and Elementor Pro. Okay, so we've seen what's installed. Let's take a look at the Elementor interface. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come in and create a new page. So we're going to add a new page and we're simply going to name this home page. This is just going to be the basis of our first page. We'll just click on publish. And once you've done that, we're now ready to start working with Elementor itself. Now the thing to bear in mind is once you create a page, you still need to pull in Elementor to use it to create the page layout. Then everything else pretty much on the page is going to be ignored in favor of Elementor. So what we need to do is click on Edit with Elementor. That will open the editor up and we'll see the editor for the first time. So let's just take a quick look at the interface itself. If we look on the left hand side, we've got a selection of different widgets. Now if you're using just the free version of Elementor, you'll see a lot less options in here. You'll have all the basic options, you won't have Pro, but you will have some additional things like General and so on. So just bear in mind if you're using the free version, you can follow along with most of this tutorial, but you are going to find some of the options that we're going to be using won't be available in the free version. So widgets, what exactly are they? They're the fundamental building blocks that we create any kind of page design out of. Things like headings, images, videos, buttons, and so on. And then we put those into a grid layout. So what do I mean by a grid layout? If we take a look on our page at the moment, you can see we've got this serrated block that just says drag a widget here. If we drag a widget over, so let's just say we'll drag in this text editor, we'll drag that over, that's now a single row and a single column. If you want to split that column into two, so we can have two separate columns with different content in, we could do just that. All we need to do is come over this particular section and we're going to click on this little option in the top left hand corner, and I'll explain all these different options as we go through. All we can do is we can right click and we can just say add new column. And there's our second column. So we can come back onto our widgets if we want to, drag an image over and drop a placeholder image inside there. So we've now created a two columns with a single row layout. So as I said, everything is done in rows, and columns. That's basically the fundamentals of it. Yes, you could override that with things like absolute positioning and so on, but that's a little bit beyond the basics of what I want to cover in this first video. So once you see that kind of thing, it's very, very easy. You start to see exactly how you can build these various different elements up, add different design aspects to it, and you can create very complex looking layouts, all using these simple building block tools. So next of all, let's take a quick look at the actual row and columns, these different icons and things that we've got available to us. If we choose this section, you can see we currently have 3 different icons. We've got add section, which will do exactly that, allow us to add another section above the current section. So we click, you can see that now pops up and says what kind of section do you want to add. We can add in a new section, so we could come in and we can choose from things like single row column, dual row column, triple, and so on. So we have pre-designed column layouts that we can tap into and use those if we want to. Alternatively, if we wanted to, we could also choose an option to add a template. Now we'll take a look at templates briefly a little later on, but they're just basically pre-designed layout pieces, pages, blocks, and so on. So again, like I say, we'll take a look at that in our dedicated section a little later in this video. So that's the first option. The next option is basically just the edit section. So if we click on that, doesn't matter what widget we may have selected. So if I just come over, click to edit this image, you'll see on the left hand side now, we've got edit image, and that's currently what this panel is going to do, allow us to edit the image. Whereas if we now come over this section, we can click on that, and it now switches over to edit section, and we can edit all the parameters to do with that section itself. Finally, you've got the X, which is the delete section. So we click on that, that will delete that section out of the page. We can, if we want to, undo anything. We come down to the bottom and we have a history option. So we can click on there, and all the different things we've done since the first editing stage are all listed inside there. So we can say we removed that. Let's just click back to the previous stage and you can see it brings it back. So we can very easily pull back anything we may have accidentally deleted, removed, moved, whatever we did. So now that we've seen how we can choose sections and edit those, duplicate those, delete those, and so on, let's take a look at each of these different columns. If we take a look, you can see each column has this little icon in the top left-hand corner. Depending on which column you go to, you'll see that icon appear. If we click on that, you can see now on the left-hand side, the panel changes over, this time to edit column. So now if we make changes to that column, it only applies to that specific column. Any adjacent columns or any columns above or below or whatever in your design will not be affected by any changes you make. So for example, when we select this, we can just select this column and then we could adjust the vertical or the horizontal align. So you could come at the vertical, we could say middle, and you can see that now positions it directly inside the middle of that particular column. So it's very easy to set up the way you want to style various different things inside each of these columns, sections, and so on. Now, one other thing I want to draw your attention to is if we come down to the bottom left-hand side, we've also got another option called Navigator. And this can be very useful when you start to have more complex designs or longer designs that you want to move things around, select things, and all those kinds of different options. If we click on the Navigator, that will open up this section on the right-hand side. You can see it tells us exactly what's on our page. So you can see at the top, it now says section, which is what we've just inserted. If we click to expand that, we have the 2 columns, the left-hand column which has the text in it, the right-hand column which has the image in it. If we click to open up any of those columns, we can see exactly what widget is placed inside that column. We can, if we want to, move things around. So if we created additional sections, we can simply drag and drop things around. So if I open up this second column and I just grab this image, I can reposition that now above the text on the left-hand column, removing it from the right-hand column. If I want to put that back, I can simply drag that back down into the position I want it, and you can see it now updates in real time. So the Navigator can be something that's very, very useful when you're working on more complex designs, or you quickly want to move things around. You may want to sort of change section alignments, positions, and so on. Well, you could use this. It's also very useful because once you select anything inside the Navigator, the left-hand column changes over to all the options associated with that selected item. So if we come back to the section, you can see we now have edit section. If we come down to the column, it says edit column. If we come to the text editor, which is in the left-hand column, you can see edit text editor is now selected. So it's very quick and easy to jump around, find exactly what you want, and do all kinds of editing and all those kinds of good things. So the Navigator is absolutely your friend. So now that we've seen the various different ways we can select things, let's take a look at the actual options on the left hand side. You can see we have 3 different tabs. We have content, we have style, and we have advanced. Now the content will change depending upon the type of widget you have selected. So if we select this text, we get this one lot of options. If we select the image, you can see we get different options. If we select the row itself, or the section itself I should say, you can see we get different options again. So this is what's called context sensitive. It changes context and the options that are available depending upon what you currently have selected. The style option works in fundamentally the same way. This is how you can go through the process of styling whatever you have selected. So again, if we choose the text and we jump over to the styles, you can see we do things like adjust the alignment, the text color, the typography. If we jump into the advanced option, we have the options to do things like adjusting and setting margins, padding, the Z index. We can apply custom CSS IDs and classes. We have some more advanced options, things like motion effects. So if you were using Elementor Pro, you'll have access to things like entrance animations, and you can make things sticky, all those kinds of very useful things. Background, border, positioning, responsive, tons of really useful things available to you. So that's the basics of the editor that you'll see most of the time. The other thing we also have is the option to use responsive mode. Now when you're working with Elementor, you can switch between 3 different modes. You can have desktop, tablet, and mobile. So if we click between any of these, you'll see we switch responsive mode, we can jump over to tablet. The screen will then shrink down and allow us to make edits to make sure that whatever we're creating and designing looks good on a tablet. And the same goes for mobile devices. We can click and we can edit things. So you can see where we've got things like the title or the logo at the top and the navigation. They're in a bit of a mess at the moment, so we'd want to tidy those up to make sure they looked great across all those key devices. So this is where it's very useful when you are working on creating a website and you want to check, see what it's going to look like and make changes. This is exactly how you do it inside the editor. So that's the basics of the editor. We do have some extra options as well. If we come down to the settings in the bottom left hand corner, we can click on there, and this opens up all the settings for the page that we're currently working on. So you can see at the moment the title for the page is the home page, which we set up when we created the page. We can adjust the status, so all the normal statuses you have as part of WordPress, draft, pending, review, and so on. We can assign a featured image if that's applicable to the design that you're working with, if it's a page or a post or so on. So if you want to use that, you can do that inside here. We can hide the title if we don't want that to display, so we can just click, that will hide the title from the page, and then that will allow us to create our own title and use that as part of the whole style setup inside Elementor itself. Finally, we have the page layout. You can see it says default, and when you've got Elementor installed, you have a couple of extra options. The Elementor canvas will basically take any header or footer templates you may have assigned as either part of your theme or as part of the actual theme builder which Elementor Pro has, which we will cover in a future video. And finally, you've got Elementor full width. This will leave all the element on the page, but it means you have full width control, so it'll go from the entire size of the screen, and then you can control exactly what will display and how it displays. For now, we'll leave this set at default. We've also got some options if we come to the top left hand corner to this little hamburger menu. We click and open that up. You can see we've got things like default colors, fonts, theme styles, global settings, and so on. If we open up something like global settings, you can see the default fallback font, the content width between the spaces between each of the widgets, all those kinds of useful things. We can also control exactly how a lightbox is used for our images and if we actually want to use a lightbox at all. Now, as we go through things and creating our website as part of this beginner's guide, we'll be taking a look at some of the options inside here and how we'd actually use them, specifically the theme style, which is a very powerful sort of recent addition to Elementor and Elementor Pro. It allows us to create global styles that we can apply to the entire site. And if we want to make changes, we can come back into one location and all those changes will ripple through the entire site. So we will be taking a look at that in depth as part of a future portion of this particular video. For now, just to know this is where we get the information from. So that really is the very basics of how the Elementor editor works. We're now going to take a look at how we can start to take some of the different elements we have and start to build out our first page. In this section, we're going to be taking a look at one of the key new features that's been added into Elementor in the recent months, and that's theme styles. What exactly are theme styles? As their name would suggest, it allows us to globally style lots of key elements for our design. So things like your headings, your body text, your forms, your buttons, your images, all those kinds of things. Then the nice thing is we can simply go and make a change to those theme styles, and that will then filter down through the entire website for us. Now, before we go any further with theme styles, it's worth bearing in mind that they work best when you're using a bare bones theme like the Hello theme. And that's the key reason why I've chosen it for this tutorial. If you're intending to use a theme like OceanWP or Astra, you may well find that it's easier and more consistent to control a lot of these things via the customizer. However, because this is all about Elementor and Elementor Pro, I want to show you how important theme styles can be. So the first thing we need to do before we can even start styling this is make sure that our settings are all configured correctly, so every change we make is all reflected throughout our entire site. So what we need to do is come back out of this, exit to our dashboard, go into the Elementor menu and into settings. Make sure that disable default colors and disable default fonts are both checked. Then we hit save changes. That means now that these theme styles we're going to create are going to make sure that they work throughout the entire site. Now we can just go back into any of our pages or posts, come back in, and we're going to edit with Elementor, and we're going to go back in and start configuring everything. Now, with this section set out, it means that I can style things and I can see exactly what's going to happen as I go through the styling process. So we come back over into our theme styles. That'll switch us over now into the theme style editor. As you can see, we've got a range of different tabs on the left hand side, and we can simply come into any of those, start configuring the various different options. So if we see we've got body, background, typography, all those kinds of things, we can configure all the different aspects. So the background is going to be the global background color for our entire site. So if we just change that to something else, so we're going to click and we can just say this red color, you can see now everything on the page, the background, has all been set up to be red, and every single page, unless we change that on a page level, would all have that red color set as the background. Let's just clear that and reset it, because obviously we don't want to put a red background in this design. It's going to look a little bit jarring. So we're going to leave the background type as it is for now. Come into typography, and from there we can now set up the basics. So the first thing we've got is the body, and that's going to relate to your normal paragraph text throughout your entire design. So we can, if we want to, adjust the typography in here. Now, one thing that's nice about Elementor is the typography controls are generally fairly good. Yes, we could do with some extra options inside there to get even more control, but for the most part and for most users, we've got everything we need. So if we open up the typography options, you can see inside there we can choose things like the font family, the size based upon the different types of devices. So if you remember back when I said we could take a look and open up the different responsive modes for tablets, desktops and mobiles, we can set different values inside there for each of those three different devices to make sure that our typography, for in this example, the body text, looks good across all those different devices. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the font family, adjust the weight, and just make some settings inside here and see how that reflects on our design. So let's start off by changing our font family. For this example, we're going to be using Quicksand, which is one of the free Google fonts. So I'm going to click on Quicksand, and you see now everything changes to display in Quicksand. That's because we've got basically a flow of all the different styles and things we set up. Right at the top, if we choose something like, for example, the body, all of the different fonts underneath that are going to take on Quicksand as being their font family. We can change that then through the heading options as we go through, and that's something we will take a look at doing next once we've set up our body text. So just bear that in mind. The same goes if we set things like text color and so on as well. Okay, so now we've done that, let's just change some of the other values for this. We're going to set this font size to be 16 pixels. You can see we can adjust the size on there. We can come in and control it. We don't have to work in pixels either. We can, if we want to, work in pixels, ems, rems, or VW. So you can choose whatever format you want to work with. I'm going to stick to pixels for this example. This isn't about best practice. This is just about showing you the easy way of going through and setting things up. If you want to work on any of those other values, then by all means do it. The process is exactly the same. Next up, we've then got the weight, and the weight is basically how heavy the font looks. So for example, if we choose something like 900, you can see we get a very bold font, whereas if we choose something like 100, we get a very thin font. Now, even though we've got quite a lot of different values inside here, not every font is going to support that weight. So you may find that you change between some different values and nothing changes on the page. That's just because the font doesn't have all of those weights created for that particular font style. So just remember that if you wonder why you set a value and it may look the same as the previous value. We can, if we want to, set things to default, normal, bold. So if you want to just use a global kind of value, bold, and not worry about there being any kind of font weight, you could do exactly that. For this example though, we're going to set this to be 400 because I think that makes it nice and easy to read. Transform just means we can do things like put everything in uppercase, lowercase, capitalized, and so on. So for example, if we did uppercase, you can see everything is now capitalized. If we chose lowercase, everything is lowercase, so no capital letters at the beginning. If we chose something like capitalized, that'll put a capital letter at the beginning of every single word, which makes it very hard to read, but can work really nicely for headings. And we can also do normal or default. So we're going to leave that to default. As you can see, that just puts everything back to what it was. The style, normal, italic, and oblique. So if you wanted to italicize something, you could do that. We're going to leave again at default. And decoration is things like underline, overline, strike through, and so on. We'll leave that to default as well. The next two options we have are line height and letter spacing. Again, you can see you can set these specific to the device you may be viewing things on. So when we switch over and take a look at the other views, we'll take a look at how that impacts these as well. So when it comes to line height, you can see we've got pixels and M values on there as well. So we can adjust that to whatever we want to make sure everything looks nice and neat and makes it readable. And that's the key thing when you're working with this. When you're setting your font styles up, make sure that everything is nice, clear, and readable for the end user on all the different types of devices you're going to be using. Letter spacing, that just allows you to adjust how much space is between each individual letter. Now generally for body text, I would normally leave that to 0 unless the font was a kind of weird looking font. However, for headings, you can get a lot more creative if you want to. Okay, so there's the basic value setup inside there. Now let's take a quick look at the size and the spacing and so on across the different types of devices. We can, if we want to, use the little icons here to switch between those different modes. Or we can come down and use the responsive mode switcher at the bottom of the left-hand panel. It's entirely up to you how you want to work. So what we're going to do first of all is adjust things on here for the font sizes. So let's just make sure that everything looks good on both desktop, tablets, and mobiles. So we click, we'll change to tablet mode, and the font size, everything looks pretty good on there. We'll switch over now to the mobile, and everything looks pretty good on there too. So you don't need to make changes on everything. The options are there if you want to. So next up, let's just change the link colors. Let's switch this back to the normal mode, so we go back to desktop. And as you can see, we've got a link positioned in part of our text. So all we need to do is come to the link section, and we've got normal, and we've got hover. So let's just change the normal color. We're going to change that. We're going to change it to this blue color. We're also going to make it a little heavier, so we can adjust the color and we can adjust the typography. So let's just make that a little more solid so the link stands out. That already stands out a little bit better. And what we can also do is we can come in and we're going to say we're going to put some text decoration and we're going to underline this so it looks a little bit more in keeping with a traditional looking link. Then we can jump over to the hover state, and if we don't make any changes on there, everything will stay exactly as it is when we hover over, which gives no kind of visual feedback. So what we're going to do is we're going to change that as well. So we're going to change that over, and we're going to say this is going to go a reddish kind of color, and we'll remove the underline. So we'll just simply come in to our decoration, and we'll just set that to be none. So now when we hover over, you can see we now get visual feedback, and we've controlled that. Now, so every link that's a normal link inside your text and so on will all pick up that natural styling. This also reflects, as you can see, up to the navigation at the top, unless we override it. Now, this is one of those little concepts that once you kind of understand what's going on with it, it'll help you move forward and make sure that you style things and set things up in the best possible way. Theme styles are a global change. So when you make something on there, everything that uses that particular styling will be updated throughout your entire site. So for example, like we just seen with the links, all links will be a blue underline, and on a hover, they'll be red. However, you can change that, but you change it on a widget level. So what I mean by that is, if you didn't want that to be the case with, for example, the heading, then you can style that differently inside the widget itself. And we'll take a look at that a little later when we take a look at making styling on the widget level. But just bear that in mind. If you make changes in the widget, typography, colors, and those kinds of things, that will override anything you set up inside the theme styles. So once you understand that, keep that in the back of your mind, you'll know that if you see a problem, that could be the reason why you've styled something inside the widget, and that's overriding your theme style. Now, I'm not going to go through and make you watch me style everything on here. You've seen how the styles work. You've seen how we can apply them. I'm now going to go ahead, apply the styling that I want to the headings 1 through 6, and then I'll come back and show you how we can make some changes to some of the other things like the forms, the buttons, and so on. It's all pretty much the same thing, but if you're not used to working with forms and things, there may be some options inside there that an explanation just could make the whole process a little easier. Obviously, if you're comfortable with this, you can skip over to the next section by using those timestamps in the description below. Okay, so there's my headings all styled up. Everything is looking nice and neat and tidy. Now let's take a look at how we can do things like the forms and buttons and so on. So we can click on the buttons. You can see we can adjust things like text color, typography, text shadow, and all those kinds of very useful things. But what we want to do is make sure that we've got the color scheme and everything set up so all our buttons look the same. Like the links, we've got normal and hover state, so we can adjust things on there. So let's quickly configure some of the basics. Let's choose our background color, and we're going to use this pale blue color, and you can see that immediately changes the button color. Text color, we're going to set that to be white to make sure it stays white all the time. And then we're going to come up to the typography, and from there we're just going to adjust a few things. So the first thing we want to do is just set this to be the same font as we're using, which is Quicksand. Size, we're going to adjust that to about 20 pixels, and we're going to set the weight to be 500, and we'll transform that to uppercase. So you can see, actually, let's just drop that down a little bit. It looks a bit too big. Okay, so you can see now we've configured some basic parameters on there. Jump into the hover state, and we can do the same thing there. So we can come in, choose our background color. We're going to make that a little darker so it gets some kind of separation when you hover over it. And now because we've created a new color and we want to use that maybe somewhere else in the site to have, everything consistent, we can simply click on this little plus and that will add a new picked color. So we can click on there, that now adds that in. If we want to position it somewhere else, we can easily move that over. Now we've got our hover and we've got our normal state for our buttons. Same again, we're going to come into our text and set that to white. Now when we hover over, you can see we get visual feedback on exactly what's going on. So there's the first part. Then we can come into our form fields if we want to, and we can adjust any of the form field information. And again, we can do all the same things. We can adjust the label, the field, the typography for normal and on focus. And focus just basically means when you click inside this particular form element, it changes slightly. You can see the outline is a little darker. Click on the next one and the next one. So you can adjust those kinds of things. So you can make any changes you want there, including, like I say, any font styling and so on, but we are still getting that flow of font styles down through the various different elements. So I'm going to leave everything else inside there as it is. And the final thing we could take a look at doing if we wanted to is setting up styles for the images. I'm not going to worry too much about that right now. We can come back at a later time if we need to and set up any kind of global settings. Now, once we've configured those kind of elements all inside the theme style section, we can now hit update. That will now reflect those changes and save them for us. So now when we create new pages, templates, and so on, as long as we don't overwrite any of these settings on a widget level, these will now style all those various different elements throughout our entire site. And that is the very, very basics of how we use theme styles. But hopefully what you can see in this section is once you set these things up at the beginning, it makes it incredibly easy then to either make changes later on down the line or just to style everything you need to have that flow throughout your entire site and just speeds up the process of designing and styling everything. So in this section, we're now going to start taking a look at how we can build up our website, the various different components that make up both a page and also some of the key template files that we can assign to our entire site. Now, working with template files or theme files, if you want to call it that, just speeds up the process of creating various different parts. So for example, things like your header with your navigation and your logo, your footer with maybe contact information and things like that. You want to create those and assign those globally to your entire site, so you don't have to do that on every single page. Now, Elementor Pro makes this very, very easy. We can start to take advantage of the templating system or the theme files. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at building our header and our footer, and also take a look at things like blocks and templates and things like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to come into the template section on the left hand side, and we're going to come down into the theme builder. Now, don't be daunted or put off by the fact this calls it a theme builder. We're not going to be building an entire theme, but we are going to be creating some of the key components. So when we look at the theme builder, you can see we've got the theme builder tab, which is an overview of any of the theme files we may create now and moving forward. We've then got 4 key areas in which we can group things together: headers, footers, single, and archive. Now in this tutorial, this first part, we're not going to even touch the single and the archive. We'll look at those in their own dedicated tutorial on the theme builder. What we are going to look at though are the header and footer sections. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a header that's going to apply to an entire site. So we're going to click on header. Once we come into there, because we've got no theme files created, we're asked to create our first header. So what we're going to do is click on add new header. You can see it pulls up the choose template type option, but because we're already in the header section, it knows we're going to create a header. Next thing, we're going to name this. So what we're going to do is we're going to call this default header. Now I just use the term default for anything that's going to be the standard theme file that's going to be used across our entire site. This doesn't limit you in any way. It just means when you come back and look at any of the theme files or templates you may create, they just have a logical kind of grouping. So with that being said, we're going to say create template. Once that's gone through, we're going to open up the Elementor editor and open up the library where we can choose from 3 different sections. Now don't be worried about this. We're not going to go into tons of detail. This is just a quick and easy way of using these either as a starting point or as just something we want to take exactly as it is and then maybe make some changes just to pull in things like our own logo and so on. So what we have at the top, if we take a look, are blocks, pages, and my templates. Blocks are exactly as its name suggests, small block pieces that could make up an entire page. So for example, you can see we're currently looking at the header section. So all of these are basic templates for headers. If we come over to the left hand side, you can see we've got a drop down that allows us to go through and take a look at any of the other blocks. So what exactly are the use of blocks? Well, they've got a couple of different uses. If you want to use them to quickly prototype a design idea, you could pull in all different kinds of block pieces, create a page, create template files, create theme files. Use those then as a quick starting point, go in and configure things to make them look a little bit more unique. Alternatively, you could just use things like headers and footers and ignore all of the other blocks. There's lots of different use cases. So with that being said, we've got these different blocks. Under the pages section, if we jump over there, we've now got templates for pages. So these are, instead of being blocks where it's an individual piece, maybe like a hero or a header section or a footer section, these are entire pages. So you can see if we click on any of these, we've got the little magnifying glass so we can preview it. If you take a look, this is made up of an entire group of different sections to create an overall page. The only thing that's missing off these, with most of the templates at least, is the header and the footer, because they are a global element. Click back to our library, and if we wanted to, we can go through and take a look at all of these. You will find some more of the new designs are grouped together for various different types of pages and have an overall theme applied to them. And by a theme, I just mean a style. So you can see we've got this one for a photography portfolio kind of site. We've got a home page, an about page, a contact page, and so on. So these are all pages that all fall together under one design theme. You could pull those in and then adjust them to meet your own requirements. Then finally, we've got my templates. Now currently there's nothing in here because we haven't created any kind of template file whatsoever. However, if you start to create templates, they will be listed inside here, and every time you go in to either create a theme file or a normal page or post or so on, you can access your own template file. So this is a great way of being able to create reusable pieces and then just use those wherever you want in your page designs. For this though, we're going to stick with the blocks. So we're going to click on blocks and we're going to find a header that's in keeping with the clean style that we're going to use for this particular web design. So because most of our design is nice, clean, simple, white space, we're going to choose a header that's in keeping. So we've got a couple of different options we can choose from, and if we want to preview to see if it's going to be something we like, we can hover over, click the little magnifying glass and take a quick look. Now this one looks perfectly fine. We're only using this as a starting point and we can change any aspect of this should we want to. So what we're going to say is we're going to insert this. That will then insert this into the page for us, close out that browser, and then allow us to start making changes. Now, as you can see, we've got things happening here that don't make it look exactly the same as that preview did. You can see the get started looks a little bit weird. We've also got the home and the blog don't look exactly as we expected to. That's because these haven't been styled on the widget level. So they're picking up the global styling we just set up as part of the theme styles. So we can, if we want to, make changes to any of those aspects. This entire section is simply made up of normal Elementor widgets. So we can change anything we want. So let's do that. Let's first of all, let's get rid of this button. We don't want that as part of our design. So we're simply going to click on this option that allows us to select the row, and then we can right click and we can just say delete. That will take that out of there and cleans that side of things up. If we come over now on the left hand side, we can get rid of this other column that's no longer needed. So we're going to click on there, right click, choose delete. And you can see that now puts our logo a little bit large and not necessarily where we want it to be. So we can make some adjustments there as well. We can select this particular object. So we're going to click and you can see edit site logo. So again, we're getting the context information on the left hand side. What we're going to do, position that over to the left. If you want to make any changes on there, you can do exactly that. We could jump over the style if we wanted to, and we can control the maximum width that's going to be displayed. So if we don't want this to be absolutely massive, we'll say we're going to keep this to something like the maximum size is going to be 55. We can do maximum width if we want to, width, whatever we want to do with it. Okay, so that being done, let's go to the right hand side. We're going to click on there, and this now is edit the nav menu. So now we can control exactly how the various different parts of this look. So we don't want this to be in this blue color with the underline. So we're going to jump over to the style tab, and from there, we're going to change things inside there. So we're going to come in and we can reset this back to defaults to make sure that we're not using any predefined styles, anything that's been set up in this widget as part of the template. So now if we want to, we can simply come in, change the text color. So we're going to set that to be this gray color. You can see that now changes. We can adjust that as well, just get everything we want. We can adjust any padding. We can come into our typography, and from there, we're going to say we want no decoration. And you can see that now immediately removes that underline. We're going to change the weight to make it a little heavier so they stand out a bit better. That looks pretty good. And we're going to transform this to be uppercase. And we're just going to drop the size of this down to about 15. Actually, let's make that 14. So you can see now we've adjusted this on the widget level, and that then overrides any settings we configure as part of those theme styles. Hopefully this is kind of making sense the way it's all going. Let's adjust the horizontal padding. Just tighten those up just a little bit. We'll set those to about 15. That looks better. And now if we want to, we can adjust the hover. So you can see if we come over it, nothing is really happening. So we're going to change the text color on there to this pale blue. When we hover over, we now get the pale blue effect. So we're starting to style things the way we want. Active, we're going to do the same inside there. We want to set the active state. And all that really means is, let's just say, for example, we were looking at the contact page. Then it would mean that in the navigation at the top, contact being the active page would be highlighted in whatever color we want. So we're going to set that to be this slightly darker blue. So we're keeping that theme styling. Everything is now nice and consistent. We've got everything the way we want. We've got a drop down in here at the moment, but we're going to take that off as part of the whole process. I've just got a couple of posts inside there we don't need. But if you wanted to style the drop down, you could do that inside here as well. And all the same kind of controls, the normal, the hover, the active, your text colors, background colors, and all those kinds of things are available to you. So you can style that any way you want. Okay, so final thing we want to do is select the entire section. And from there, we're going to come to style, and we're going to make sure that our border at the bottom is taken off. So we're going to simply set that to be 0. We have no border at the bottom. We can, if we want to though, we could apply things like drop shadows, whatever you kind of want to do to style this to make it unique. So what you've seen is we've used those block level elements, we've pulled that in, we've used that as the starting point, and then we've gone through and made changes to the way it all looks to make sure it's in keeping with the styling that we want to set up for our entire design. So these are great starting points, but we have full control over configuring every single aspect of them moving forward. Okay, so now we've set up the styling. Let's hit publish. And because this is a theme file, we need to apply a condition to it. And all the condition means is, when is this theme file going to be used? Because this is a header and it's going to be applied to the entire site, the condition is incredibly simple. All we do is click on add condition, and you can see the default option is include entire site. We can include or exclude. And we click on entire site, you can see we've got 3 options: entire site, archives, or singular. We're going to leave this to entire site, and we'll take a look at all these different options in a lot more detail in the dedicated tutorial to dealing with anything to do with building a theme with Elementor Pro. For now, we're going to keep this really simple and straightforward. So this now will apply to the entire site. So I'm going to hit save and close. That's now applied that. That header will be on every single page we have on the site right now, and also when we add new pages as we go through and build the site out. So now that we've completed the header, we can repeat the same process and create the footer. So let's just quickly do that. I'm not going to go through in the same amount of detail, but it's just going to show you how quick and easy it is. So we'll exit back out of this, back to our dashboard, back into our theme builder. This time we'll choose footer. We'll add a new footer and we'll name this default footer. Create our template, and from there, that'll take us into the browser. We can choose from all the blocks, pages, and templates. We're going to find something that I think is in keeping to this design, and we'll just pull this one in. So we're just going to insert this into our design. Once that's done, you can see that's pulled that in, and now if we want to, we can make changes to any of the styling on here. However, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this particular section. So delete that, and we're going to keep this really nice, plain, and simple. So there's our footer section. So we're going to hit publish, add our condition like we did, choose include entire site, and say save and close. That's our header and our footer created, adjusted, and applied to our entire site. So that's how we start to work with these basic template files and build out some basic elements for our theme. So now that the header and footer are in place, let's take a quick look at what this looks like inside our design before we move on and start creating our homepage. We can do that in a couple of ways inside Elementor when we're in the editor. We can simply close up the left-hand panel, and that will show us what the page will look like, and we can interact with all the different elements on the page. Or we can come down and we can choose the option that's like a little eyeball, click on there and say preview. That'll open up a new tab and show us what it'll look like in a clean, fresh browser. So now we've seen that, there's a couple of things I want to rectify on here. We can ignore this default footer and content area. Those are basically going to be ignored later on anyway. They're just sort of placeholders just to say that this is the content area. Let's close this down, come back in, and what we're going to do is, while we're currently editing the footer, if we see something in the header we want to make a change to, do we need to jump back out of this and then go back into the template for the theme file for the header? We used to have to do that, but now with the newer version of Elementor Pro, we get past that because we've got what's called inline editing. So if I come up over the header, you can see once I come over that, I now get a sort of orangey yellow box at the top that outlines the header and gives me the option to edit the header. Now if we click on that, we'll switch over and start editing the header. We're no longer editing any other template file, we're specifically working with the header. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that this is separated. So we're going to click on it, click on the section, we're going to add in a little drop shadow at the bottom. So we're going to come to the style section, come down to border, and from there we're going to choose box shadow. I'm going to click on that, and you can see that now puts a faint shadow at the bottom. We can configure that in any way that we want to. So I'm going to make it a little lighter so it's a little more subtle. And once we've done that, I'm happy with the way it all looks. So with that in place, there's one more thing I want to do. Currently, this sort of fits the entire width of the page. I don't want that to happen. So again, making sure we've got the section selected, I'm going to come back out to our layout, and you can see currently it says content is full width. I'm going to select that and I set it back to be boxed. That will now make sure that as the page size grows, it will make sure that it only goes so far before it stays in place. And I just think that's a nicer way of working. So if we now just close this down, you'll see that now sits exactly where I want it to and stays in line with the way that the footer is currently set up. Let's come back out of that. We'll hit update. And now when I want to go back to carry on editing the page that I was originally working on, all I need to do is come back down to that section, in this example, the footer, and you can see the footer is now in yellowy orange, says edit footer. We click back on that, and now we're back to editing the actual original page or template file or theme file that we were working with. So that's what I wanted to show in this particular part. We're now ready to move on and start building out our first page, knowing that our header and footers are already in place. So what we're going to do, we can click and come out of this, exit to our dashboard, and we're simply going to go back into our pages, go to all pages, and we're going to create a new page called homepage. I'm going to click on that. We're going to name this homepage, and then we're going to publish this. I'm going to say edit with Elementor. Once you go back into the Elementor editor, we're now ready to start building things. So the first thing I want to do is get rid of this really ugly homepage title at the top. We don't want that. This is something that's part of the template for the single page. We can get rid of that by simply coming into settings in the bottom left hand corner, and where it says the option to hide title, we just enable that. Now with our title gone, we're ready to start building that page. So taking all of the skills that we've learned so far, it's very easy now to start building things up because we know that everything is working in rows and columns. We've got widgets we can drop in, and we can build the various different parts of our page out from there. So I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because the process is more a case of how do each of the sections work and what can we configure inside there, as opposed to how does Elementor work. So the first thing we want to do is add a new section at the top. So we're going to click to add a section, and we're going to put in this single row column section. Click on that. That now positions that at the top of our page, and we're now ready to go through and start configuring what goes on with that, how it works, and how we style it. So let's take a little look. We've got it selected. We're going to come over now, first of all, and take a look at the layout options, and from there we're going to configure some basic values. What we're going to do is we're going to just come down until we get to the height option. Now, currently it's set to default. We're going to use this as sort of a nice slider image section at the top to draw attention to what's going on the page and the kinds of things that we do as an architect in this example. I'm going to change that, and we're going to set this to have a minimum height. So we're going to click on there, and that now opens up some additional options. You can also see that the outline, the blue outline, has started to change based upon the value that's currently set as default, which is 400 pixels. Now you can see we've got that same option to adjust this for the different types of devices you may be looking at, so desktops, tablets, and mobiles. We've also got the options for a pixel value, VH and VW. We've then also got the value we want to use. So we're going to set this to be 650 pixels. So we have a nice, really nice looking header at the top that's going to display some of the work that this particular architect has worked on. We've then got column position. Now it depends if you want to put content into this. We're not putting content in there. We're just putting some images as a background. So we don't need to worry about configuring anything inside these options. We can jump onto the style section, and from the style section, this is where we can now configure things. So currently you can see we've got background is set to normal. We can also set the hover, so we can have a different background or different effect based upon when we mouse over this section or not. What we want though are one of these four options underneath. We've got classic. We click on there. We can either choose a color or an image. We can click on gradient, or we can create a gradient effect if we wanted to. We've also got video, so we could drop a video into the background if you wanted to use one, and we can use things like YouTube or Vimeo. You could even use a file that's located on your own system as well, as in on the server. What we want though is slideshow, and this allows us to create a nice slideshow at the top of our page. We have no images currently selected, so we now need to go in and configure this and set up some images we want to use. So what we're going to do is click on this plus. We have no images uploaded at the moment, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload some images that I've already sized, ready to start working. So I'm going to drag and drop these images up, let those upload, and we're going to pull in the sliders that we want to use. So this is the first slider image that we have, and what we're going to do is we're just going to call this building 1. It's always good to make sure you put some alt text in there that relates to what's actually being used. Now we're going to uncheck all these other options because I don't want to use those inside here, because we're dealing with a sort of gallery, a sort of slider background kind of thing. We can select multiple different images. Next up, we're going to choose this second image, and we're just going to call this building 2. So like I say, good for SEO purposes. And we're just going to say create a new gallery. So I'm going to click on that, and we say insert gallery, and you can see now our images are placed into the background. These will transition through based upon the settings that are now set underneath. So you've got things like infinite loops. In other words, this will constantly keep going around between all the different images inside this particular section. The duration is basically how long each image will stay on screen. Transition, you can see we can do things like slides, we can do things like fade. So it's up to us to do exactly what we want there. So you can see we've got slide up, that'll wait for the 500 milliseconds, or 5000 milliseconds I should say, and then adjust. Put that back to fade, I prefer that. Transition duration, as its name suggests, how long the transition of the fade lasts. So you can configure anything else you want on there, but I'm going to leave that as is because, like I say, this is the focus of this particular part of the page. We'll come down underneath now, and the next thing we're going to do is we're going to drop in another new section. So we're going to click to add a section. This time we want to drop in a 3-column section. So we're going to click on that. That's dropped in our 3 columns, but we want to make a bit of space above and below just to give this some breathing space. So we're going to select the section, come over to our advanced section, and from there we can now adjust the different values for padding and margins and so on. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in and unlink these, which means we can set the values independently. And we're going to set the first one to be 100 for the top and 100 for the bottom. So it gives us lots of nice breathing space around all the different parts of our site, or our section. We're also going to jump back into the layout, and we're going to change the column gap. Now the column gap is, as its name suggests, is how much space is given between each of these individual columns. We don't want things to be squished up next to each other, so we can control that very easily. So we're going to come in and we're going to say we want this to be extended. That just gives us a bit more space around the outside edges of our content. Now, speaking of our content, what are we going to put in here? Well, first of all, we're going to simply drag in a heading widget. I'm going to drag and drop that into this first section. We're also going to come back and select a text editor. So we're going to drop that into that section. So we've now created 3 columns. We've put in our header. We've put in our content. Now, obviously, at the moment, this header just looks way too big. And obviously, the text isn't what we want to say. So what we're going to do is we're going to change that text first of all, so we can select it. And now we can edit it in one of 2 ways. We can edit it on the page itself by selecting it and just typing in what we want. Or we can use this section on the left-hand side and do exactly the same thing. So we'll do that for the first one. And as you can see, we've now put our text in, but it still looks too big. So what I'm going to do is, using the power of that theme style that we've set up, we're going to change the HTML tag. So at the moment it's set to H2, we're going to set this to H4. So now the easiest way of replicating this is to simply come over, select duplicate, and then we can just drag and drop that over. Do the same again, we can duplicate, and we can drag and drop that over there as well, and then just make the changes that we want. So what we need to do is click, and we're just going to change this now to the second heading. Super easy. And then finally we could do the same thing again. Now there's a couple of things you could do. Let's just take this column out. Let's just delete that. We now set this to be 2. What we could do is, we're not just limited to duplicating widgets. We can duplicate the layout options as well. So for example, we want to add in another column that's going to look exactly the same as the other 2. So what we could do is just right click on the column and then just say duplicate. We now have not only a duplicate of the column, but also a duplicate of the content in that column. So it's very easy. There's lots of different ways in which you can tap in and make the whole process of editing what you're doing just so much easier. So let's just finally put in the information for that final one. And we've created the first section at the top of our page and also the 3 key points of what our business is all about. So we've got one more section to add into the site now, and that's basically our little bit of a portfolio kind of thing to draw attention to some of the projects we've currently been working on. So we're going to click to add that in. Add a new section in. Once you've got that section in place, we can come over and we're going to just choose the gallery option. Now recently, Elementor Pro released the gallery updated plugin, which just gives it a lot more functionality over the original one, which really was quite poor. So thankfully we now have a lot more control over how things look. So let's just drag that widget into place. And now we can come in and choose exactly what images are going to be used inside here. So what we can do is we can click to add in either single or multiple galleries. We're going to keep this simple and just use the single option. So we're going to click. Now one of the nice things about this gallery is it doesn't matter too much if your images are not all the same aspect ratio. So I'm going to choose 6 images, most of which have the same aspect, but one that doesn't. So we're going to say create new gallery. We'll insert that gallery. And this will pull the information in now. And as you can see, everything looks nice and neat and all inline and matching. That's because this new gallery version has a lot more control over exactly how the images are going to be displayed, which gives us a lot more creative freedom to not worry about the aspect ratio of images. So let's take a look at some of the options. We can lazy load if we want to, and all that really means is that they won't load the images in until the user scrolls down the page and kind of triggers this section on the site. They will then fade in. This helps speed up the load time on any page that you're working with, so it is something that can be very, very useful. We'll leave that as is. We'll leave the lazy load on there. We've then got the layout, and you can see we've got 3 options: grid, justified, and masonry. Currently, the grid option does exactly what its name suggests. It creates a nice grid, and it will then set the aspect ratio for each of those images to make sure everything looks nice and neat. Justified will kind of do a slightly different thing. You can see we've got different aspect ratios, but it makes sure that everything fits into the layout and looks great. So if you are dealing with various different size and shape images, this is a great option to make sure that your galleries look really, really nice. The third and final option is masonry, which does a similar kind of thing, but doesn't respect the sort of the shape of them as much. You can see this bottom one drops down a little underneath, so it kind of looks at the overall and then doesn't worry about the bottom row, as it were. Let's set this back to be the grid option because I want everything to be the same. So we're going to set that to grid so they all match up. Columns, we're going to change that from 4. We're going to set it to 3 so it just looks a little nicer and we've got bigger images to look at. Now, speaking of the images, they do look a little bit pixelated and a little bit low quality. That's because currently we're using the image size of medium, which is 300 by 300 pixels. So let's just change that. Now, depending upon how you've got your WordPress configured, you may see different values inside here, but just a normal WordPress, you should have thumbnail, medium, large, and full. We're going to set this to be medium large, and you'll see that now increases the quality of those, but obviously also increases the file size a little bit. We're going to adjust the spacing so we get a bit more of a gap around each of these different images. We'll set that to about 30 pixels. That looks quite nice. And what we can do then, we can control what these images link to, and also the aspect ratio that's being displayed. So the link by default is going to go to the media file. You could change it to none, so you can't click on these. They're just literally there to show you those different images. You can choose the media file, which is the default, or a custom URL. We'll leave it to media file, and then that'll open it up inside a nice lightbox effect. The aspect ratio, as you can see, we can configure that any way we want to. 3:2 looks quite nice, but you could, if you want to do 4:3, it would then refresh those and change the size and aspect ratio accordingly. You could do something like 1:1 if you wanted to make sure they're all nice and square. Entirely up to you, and just let your creative juices flow on that. We're going to set that back to 3:2. That looks pretty nice. If you want to, you can apply an overlay. So you can see when you mouse over them, it does this overlay effect, which is nice if you are offering the ability to click and it opens up. That's pretty cool. You've also got the option to have either text go over there or just leave it as is. Now, default is it will just create a hover effect with nothing else. However, you could set the title and the description. You can see if we click to expand those out, we've got title, caption, alt, description, and so on. So each image, when you upload it to your media library, you can put things like alt text, descriptions, and so on. That would then use that data if you include it when you hover over. Entirely up to you if you'd want to use something along those lines. So there's one final thing I want to do now for our gallery, and that's put a title on there just so people know exactly what this is all about. So it's just a list of our current projects. So all we're going to do is come over, we're going to choose to drop a heading in above our gallery, and we're just going to put in the title of our current projects, and we'll set that to be H3, which fits in quite nicely with the sizing. Once we hit update, all those changes now are committed. So what we can do is we can take a look at this on our page and see how this home page interacts with the header and footer that we've just configured as part of our theme. So let's click to preview this, and you can see there's our header section. We'll let that transition between the two images so you can see it in action. We scroll down, there's our 3 columns, there's our gallery lazy loading, and if we click, you can see it opens it up now in a nice light box. Now there are a couple of things that we want to sort out. First of all, we haven't taken a look at how this will look on mobile devices and tablets, so we need to rectify that. We also see that we are a little bit too close to the footer section. So again, all these things are incredibly easy to rectify. Let's close this down and go back into Elementor. We're going to grab this section, which is our portfolio section. We're going to click on that, come into the advanced tab, and all we're going to do is unlink the padding options, and we're going to apply 100 pixels at the bottom. This then gives us a nice amount of white space underneath our gallery for the footer. So that's the first part. So next we need to go and make sure this looks good on all those different devices. So let's click to open up responsive mode, and we'll start off with the tablet. Now changes we make on the tablet mode will flow down to the mobile. So it's always worth bearing in mind some things you can change in tablet and will work perfectly on mobile, and vice versa. You might see sometimes you have to make changes in the mobile to be specific to a mobile device. So let's take a little look. Our header section looks okay, maybe a little on the large side. Plus, we've also got our navigation hamburger menu, looks a little bit out of place there, being sort of stuck in there. So we'll come back to that in a moment. But let's just deal with the page, and then we'll worry about the header and footer. So we're going to click to edit this section, and what we're going to do is we're going to come out to our layout, and we're going to adjust our minimum height. So at the moment, we see we've got minimum height, and it's just picking up the value from the desktop. Let's adjust that to make it a bit more in keeping. So let's just say something like about 360 pixels. That looks quite nice on a tablet. We scroll down then where we've got this area. The gap is probably a little too big at the moment. So we're going to come into our advanced section, and we're going to adjust this now. So we're going to unlink these values. So we're going to set the top. We'll try 50 in there and 50 in the bottom. That looks a little bit better. If we wanted to adjust these, we could adjust these as well. So let's just say we want to adjust the size of this. So we can easily come in and we could change that to something like H5 if we wanted to, or we could leave it at H4, and we can come to the style tab and we can adjust it on the widget level. So we could say, let's come into typography. So we keep that hierarchy of the heading, and we just adjust the size for this particular layout. So we'll adjust that, we'll set that to 15. Actually set it to 14, because we might find we'll have a problem with the next one. We'll do the same then underneath. We'll just click on this, and we're just going to come into our Style tab, come into our typography, and we'll adjust the size of that ever so slightly. We'll also adjust the line height, just to tighten things up there so it looks a little better on this kind of device. Okay, so we've now adjusted that so it looks better on a tablet. We've got to go through the same process now for the other two. Now, instead of having to do it manually, there is a quick and easy way to do it. If we right click on any of these widgets, so this example, we've got the little text widget, we're going to copy, we're going to come out of the text widget in the next one, we're going to right click, and we're going to say paste style. And you can see that now picks up the style. We can do the same for the next one, so paste style again. We can do the same for the heading, we can right click on it, we can copy, come out to the next heading, paste style, and the same on the next one, paste style. So we can easily adjust those to make sure that everything is in keeping the way that we want. Obviously, you spend a little bit more time adjusting this to make sure everything fits perfectly, but it gives you an idea of how things work. So finally, we're going to come over now into our little portfolio section. We're going to choose this heading, and we're going to do the same again. We're going to come into the style section, and we're simply going to adjust the size of that so it's a little bit more in keeping with the visual hierarchy that we've got throughout our site. So that will now override that, but only on this tablet version. We come down and select the gallery. We come to our settings, and from there we're going to say we're going to adjust this. So we might say we want to still have 3 columns on there, so it all kind of fits a little bit better. And finally, we're going to come into the advanced tab, and from there we're going to adjust the bottom spacing. I'm going to set that to be 50 now, and we'll hit update. That's our tablet version modified. Finally, we're going to come in and choose our responsive mode for mobile. Click on there, and you can see now things have changed again. And the nice thing is, because we're using Elementor widgets, a lot of the control over how things resize and change and stuff like that is kind of controlled on that level. So there's a lot of things that are already done for us in the background. However, we can still adjust things. So where we've kind of gone over now to this layout, we need to adjust the header still. Start off though with this slider section. So again, you can see this is probably a little too big. We'll adjust that a bit more in keeping. We'll set that to about 200. I don't mind the spacing on the rest of it, that looks okay, but what I do want to do is change the alignment so these now sit centered. So we're going to click on the heading, and what we're going to do is come over to the content, set the heading. So set that to be centered, and do the same then underneath. So we'll set that to be centered. And we can use the same trick again. We can right click, copy, right click, paste style, right click, paste style. So it's a quick and easy way of being able to quickly style one thing and then not have to go through the whole process of doing it every single time. So everything else looks okay on the page. That looks pretty good being a single section. Obviously, we can adjust anything we want to on there. So the final thing we need to take a look at now is the header section. So before we make any more changes, let's update that so we can save everything we've done on this page. And let's just use that inline editing now where we switch over to start working with the header. So let's switch it back first of all over to tablet mode. Let's edit the header. Let's choose this option now. We can just configure the way that everything works on here. So you can see we've got this empty section over on the right hand side that we want to kind of deal with. So what we're going to do is we're going to set that column and we're going to set that to be 50%. And there you go. That now positions that over on the right hand side correctly. If we switch over now to mobile view, we can do the same thing again. So what we can do is we can click on that. This time we're going to set that to be 70. Just so we have a little bit more room because the logo's a bit on the small side there. And again, like I say, we can adjust any of the aspects of this to make sure everything sits perfectly. Hit update. And we've now gone through and configured the header, the footer, the content for all the different types of devices. So let's just switch back to desktop. And as you can see now, everything sits the way you'd expect it to. Switch over to tablet, it adjusts. Switch over to mobile, it adjusts again. So we've configured all 3 different types of devices very quickly and very easily, all inside the Elementor editor. So in this section, we're going to take a quick look at how we can create another page. This example is going to be the contact page. So we've already gone ahead and created a normal blank page inside WordPress, and we're now ready to open up Elementor to start creating the content. So once we've opened that up, first thing we're going to do is come down to the settings section and disable that title like we did before. Next up, we're going to put in the first section, which is going to be, in this example, the map to the location of the business. So what we're going to do, click back to our widgets, and we're going to use a Google map. Now, because we know this is going to be a single row column, I could, if I wanted to, click and add a new section, or I can just drag the Google map up, drop it over this little box. You can see it now goes blue. I can let go, and it now knows what I want to do is just basically drop that into the page. So there we go. There's the first part of it done. Now we just need to set up some styling, set up some different parameters and so on. So first thing we're going to do is select the section, take a look on the left hand side. First thing, get rid of those column gaps. So we're going to click on that and say no gap. Once we've done that, we're going to say we want the content to be full width. So this is going to span the entire full width of the page no matter how big it is. Click on that, you can see that now goes up to the edges. Now to keep this in keeping with the front page where we had this header section with the images set to 650 pixels high on the desktop, we're going to do the same thing on here. Making sure that we've got the actual widget selected this time, we're going to set the height to 650 pixels. You can see now the container, the section, will automatically adjust for the size we set up in this. We don't need to set the height of this. That's being dictated by the actual widget inside there. Next, we're going to set this up to be 14 on the zoom level, so we're a little bit closer to the location of this particular business. So there's the first part of it done. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to drop in another section that puts in the address, contact details, and a contact form. So let's click to add in a 2-column widget. So we're going to click, choose this 70/30 layout. I'm going to click on that, choose the section, come in like we did before, and just apply 100 pixels padding at the top and the bottom, just to give us that nice space around things. So first thing we're going to do is drop in the contact forms. We're going to come back onto our widgets, scroll down until we get to our form, drag and drop that inside there. You can see this still picks up that styling we set up earlier on as part of the overall theme style. So that's nice to see, but we can now go in and configure the various different aspects of this form. Before we do, let's set this section, this column. We're going to come in and we're just going to put a bit more spacing around that. So we're going to just come in, we'll set that to be linked, and we'll try 50 pixels. Oh, not 500, 50 pixels. That'll do. That looks quite nice. Let's choose our actual form element. We're going to remove those labels. I'm going to come in now and we're just going to set up some other things. Now, I'm not going to make this form all work. That's not what we're going to cover in this particular section. This is more about just the basics of building your pages and the fundamental skills involved. Let's adjust this with some row gaps. Let's set that to about 25. That's looking pretty good. So there's the first part. Now what we're going to do is come over, we're going to grab a text editor, drop that into the right hand side, and we're just going to put in the address. So let's just drop the text inside there. There we go. What we're going to do now is make sure that this all sits nice and neat and tidy. So you can see we've got padding on this section, but we don't have it on here. So we can deal with that in a couple of different ways. We could add some padding in there if we wanted to, or we can just set this column to come in and set that to be middle. So it's up to us exactly how we want to style this. One more thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to select this section, and we're just going to put a little bit of a border around this, a little bit of a drop shadow maybe, just to make it stand off the background. But obviously you could get creative in any way you wanted to. So let's just choose a border. We're going to set this to be solid. We'll set it to be a very pale grey. And then we'll set this to be 1 pixel with a border radius of, let's just say something like 8. I think that may be a little darker so it stands out a bit better. There we go. So we've now created a little border section around there. We can hit update, and that's the basics of our contact page all set up. So again, we can just click to preview the changes on there. There's our map. If we scroll down, there's our contact form. There's our text for our address and so on. Obviously, there's a ton of things we could do to this. There's one more thing I want to show you before we close this down. Let's just say we want to add a little bit of animation to this. Let me make a bit of breathing space on there first of all. So we'll just come in, padding on the left-hand side, and we'll set that to be 20 just so it stands off there. Actually, let's set that to be 50. There we go. Let's just say we wanted to animate some of these aspects to come in on the page. We could select this section, come into Advanced, and we come into Motion Effects. Now we can, if we want to, create an animation for the entrance animation. So just click, and we'll just say Fade in Right. Click on that, you can see it fades in from the right. Or we can come in and say Fade in Left. It'll fade in from the left-hand side. We could set the right-hand column to do the opposite if we wanted to. So we can do Motion Effects, come in, and we're just going to say Slide in or Fade in Left or Fade in Right. So now, let's just preview this page. And we'll find that those aspects, as we scroll down, they animate in from the left and the right hand side. Let's refresh that so you can see it properly. There we go. So we can easily add different animation effects in should we want to give the page just a little bit of life. But hopefully what you've seen is it's not complex to start working with Elementor and Elementor Pro. So now that we've covered the basics, we're ready to move on to something that's a core fundamental skill when you want to move beyond the basics of working with WordPress and Elementor. And that is the theme builder. Now the theme builder opens up a lot of opportunities. It's a very simple way of working. It bypasses the need to be working with complex WordPress themes, and you can get as creative as you want using this. So by the time you finish watching this portion of the video, you should have a good solid foundation in how to use all of the theme builder files, the tools, and everything that's at your disposal. Anyway, let's take a look at how the theme builder inside Elementor Pro works. So the first thing we're going to do is download and install the Hello theme. Now the reason we use the Hello theme is because even though we're kind of building our own theme, WordPress itself just needs to have a theme installed. We don't necessarily have to use it, and we're going to use the Hello theme because it's basically just a bare bones theme by the developers of Elementor itself. This makes sure that we've got WordPress happy and we don't need to worry about any extra bits and pieces getting in the way and causing problems when we set things up as part of our theme. Now on top of the Hello theme, we also need to make sure that we've got Elementor Pro installed. Now you have to use Elementor Pro. The free version doesn't come with the ability to create theme files. We can save some basic templates like page and section templates, but not build a theme. So just bear in mind, if you don't have the Pro version, you can't really follow along with what I'm going to cover in this particular video. So providing you've got the Hello theme installed, you've got Elementor and Elementor Pro installed, we're ready to start moving on. So let's just jump over into the dashboard of WordPress now and start taking a look at all the things we have to start building our own custom themes with Elementor Pro. Now, since I did my initial video on how to use the theme builder in Elementor 2.0, things have kind of moved on. The core fundamentals are pretty much the same, but we now have some real time-saving features that makes the whole process even more simple and even more comprehensive. But we need to set a few things up first of all. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come over into Elementor and we're going to come into the settings section. From there, we're going to take two options and we're going to disable those, the disable default colors and default fonts. So we're going to check both of those and hit save changes. Now, why are we doing this? Because Elementor recently released the ability to create theme styles, and that means that we can set fonts, we can set font sizes, colors, button colors, whole range of different things. All of this now means that when we create our own themes, we can also tie in all of that information as well, all those design assets. We have to disable the default colors and default fonts, otherwise this won't work. The next thing we're going to do is jump over to the appearance and the customizer so we can take a look at what options are available as part of the Hello theme, just so you can see some of the things you can do in there, but primarily just to see that there's pretty much nothing to it. Let's go into appearance and into customize. Once we come over into there, you can see we've got 4 tabs on the left-hand side, the site identity, menus, homepage settings, and additional CSS, if we wanted to apply some global CSS to the site. Now, by using something like the Hello theme, we can benefit from some of the options that are available. If we come into the site identity, for example, we've got 4 different options we can set up. The logo, the title, the tagline, and an icon, which is basically like your favicon that'll show up in the browser tabs. All I want to do is set the logo. So we're going to set this to use the dark logo, and we'll say select, we'll skip cropping. And what this basically allows us to do is when we set up our header and we put our logo in there, we can use the logo widget as opposed to just using an ordinary graphic. And then if we wanted to change that globally throughout the site that uses that particular widget, we'd simply have to come into the customizer. If we come back out of this now, we can set our menus inside here if we wanted to, or we can just do that in the normal way as part of the dashboard of WordPress. I'll leave it for like that for now. So to come back out, we're going to leave everything else as it is and we'll hit publish just so we've got our logo at the top. Just a nice little head start on what we're going to do. So now that we've gone through and set everything up, let's take a look at the actual theme builder itself. If we come out of the template section on the left hand side, we've got theme builder. We're going to click on that and that's going to take us into the basic theme builder section. Now you may be looking at this and thinking, well, there's not really much going on. How do we work with it? Well, let me just explain this section and then you'll see when we start to build things up how this will populate with the different types of theme building files that we set up. So first of all, we've got the theme builder, which will show all of the different theme files that we create. Currently, there are none, but as we start to create them, they'll be listed here. We then have 4 different tabs, one for each of the different types of theme files that we can create. The header and the footer, they're pretty self-explanatory what they do. The single is basically, if you look at a blog post, that's a single template. In other words, it shows the post, whereas the archive will show a list of posts. So you'll see this as we go through. Now, if you had something like WooCommerce installed, you'd see some extra tabs inside here, one for WooCommerce for single and one for WooCommerce archives. Works in the same kind of way, it just shows product as opposed to posts. That's the only difference between them. So let's kick this off by taking a look at the header setup. So we're going to click to go into header. Once we do that now, because we have no theme file set up in this particular section, we're presented with this first sort of create your first header. So what we're going to do is we're going to say add a new header. Because we've chosen the header tab, it already knows that it's a header we're going to create. But if you click to expand that, you can see we can choose from any of those other options, plus some template files, which are things like sections and so on. So let's just leave that as header. That's perfectly fine. Next thing I'm going to do is give this template file a name. Now, what I tend to do is I have a naming convention that I tend to use for pretty much all of my projects. So if I'm going to create a template file or a theme file that's going to be used globally, I'll always call it default something. So in this example, it's going to be default header. Now, if I wanted to create a header for a specific section that would be different to the default header, I would name it something different, but again, including header. So what I would suggest is just getting into the habit of creating a naming convention that you stick to, because it'll just make your life easier when you come back to a project maybe 6 or 12 months down the line, and you're thinking, what did I name that particular template file? Use a logical naming convention. It just makes your life considerably easier. Okay, so we've done the 2 things we need to at this point. We're going to click on Create Template. That will then go through, open up Elementor, and if we've got any templates we can pull in from as part of Elementor or Elementor Pro, we could use those as the starting point, or if we wanted to, we could start completely and utterly from scratch. Now let me just take you through this section before we move on and start taking a look at actually building or changing things. If we take a look, we've got 3 tabs at the top. We've got Blocks, Pages, and My Templates. Blocks, as its name would suggest, are different block elements of a page. So things like headers, footers, hero, services, those kinds of things. Those are all broken down into various different sections which you can filter from on the left-hand side using this particular section. Now, because we're creating a header, it will automatically show us the header template files that are installed as part of Elementor Pro. If we wanted to, we could change that to something else. So for example, hero, and that'll show us all of the hero blocks. Obviously, we want to stick to the header section because that's what we're currently working with. Pages, we don't need to worry about because that's going to show us full page templates. It's not what we want to use when we're creating a header. And My Templates, as we create templates, they will all be listed there so we can use those as and when we see fit. Let's come back over to the block section. So what we're going to do now is we're going to find one of these pre-designed templates and use those as a starting point for our particular design. So I'm going to take this particular header. Now you'll see that our logo is already inserted because we'd set that up as part of the Hello theme. You'll see underneath we've got the placeholder widget ready to put in our menu, but because we haven't configured a menu, nothing is showing up in there. So what we have now is a normal kind of page that we're going to work with as part of Elementor. So we can click on any of these, we can make changes to anything we want, we can configure anything any way we want. So if we didn't want this green at the top, we could simply click on there, come into our style section, and we can choose whatever color we want from there. So let's choose this light blue. We've now changed that. So we've got our first template set up. Next thing we're going to do is going to click on Publish. So once we click on Publish, you can see it takes us over and says we need to add a condition. And this is the sort of core fundamentals of using the templates as part of Elementor Pro to build up a theme. You just create conditions to say when and where a particular theme file will be used. So what we can do is we can click on Add a Condition, and then we've got 2 different settings. We've got Include and Exclude, so you can use whichever logic you want. So we're going to say Include, and you can see it currently says Entire Site. We'll click to expand that out. And from the drop-down list, we have 3 options. Now, this is a context-sensitive menu. All that term means is the menu will change based upon the theme file that we're editing. For now, though, we're going to say Entire Site is perfectly fine. If we wanted to, we can add additional conditions. So you could say add another condition and you could choose exclude. So we could say let's exclude this from the archives. And then we can say all archives, and you can see we have extra options inside there. So we could say now we've set up two different conditions that this header would be shown on the entire site, excluding any of the archive pages. So let's just remove this second condition. We've now just set it up to say include the entire site. Let's hit save and close, and that's our first theme file created. So we've now got a global header that will apply to every single page on our site. Now, if we take a look at our test page, this is the home page before the header has been applied to it. So this is the Hello Theme basic bare bones layout. So let's just refresh this page, and there's our new header. So you can see there's our blue bar at the top. We've got our logo. Obviously, we're still missing that menu system, so we'll put that in a moment. So that's how easy it is. Now, every single page, we can take a look at one of these posts. We'll jump over, and you can see, again, the actual single post template still looks absolutely terrible. But what we do have is we've got our header applied to our page. So everywhere now, this header is going to be evident. Now, before we move on, there's one other thing I want to show you, and this is one of the biggest things that have been added into Elementor Pro in the last couple of months, and one of the reasons why I'm showing you this process of creating your theme from the scratch again. So let's come over onto the left-hand side where all our widgets are, and we're going to come to the little hamburger menu in the top left-hand corner. We're going to click to open up the different options, the preferences, the settings, and all those kinds of things. What we're looking at is the third option called theme styles. So let's click and open up the theme styles. You can see it now pops over and opens up a different set of options. We've got a range of different sections inside here. The background, which is the global background color for our entire site, typography, buttons, and so on. Now, I'm not going to go in this in tons of detail because I've already covered how to use this in a lot more detail, its own dedicated video, and also how I would actually personally use it. So I'll link those two videos down in the description below. So if you want to find out more about theme styles and how the best way to use them is, check that out. Now, I'm not going to set the background for this. I'm going to leave the background as it is. However, we're going to come into the typography, and in there we can now configure all the typography options for our entire site. So let's do that. Let's set some of those up to start off with. So what we're going to do is going to come to the text color, and in there we're going to set this to be a dark gray. Once we've done that, we're going to come into the typography options, and from there we're going to just choose the font family we want to use. So for this we're going to use Poppins. We're going to set a value of about 14, and you can see if we take a look on the right hand side, you can see this is changing things, and we can see some basic examples of what we're doing. We can change the weight if we want to in here to whatever we want. So we'll set that to something like 400, so it's a little bit thicker, and we'll say we're happy with that. Paragraph spacing, well, it's up to us. We can set the values in pixels, ems, or VH. So let's just say we'll set this to be something like 16 pixels. So we have a nice space between the paragraphs. So with that in place, if we want to, we can change our link color. So we can say what we're going to do is, so on hover, we're just going to set this to be underlined. So we'll come into the typography, set the decoration to underline. And then on the normal, we're going to set the color to be different. So we'll set that to that light blue color. So we've now globally styled the link colors for the hover and the normal state, and we can do the same for our headings. So what will happen is we can use this sort of hierarchy. So if we set the font to be a particular style, in this case Poppins, you can see that the header is also styled to Poppins. So we can leave that as it is, and it'll sort of cascade down through. However, if we wanted to, we could change anything to do with the different headings as well. So we can change the color and the typography. So let's just say for the typography, we didn't want to use Poppins. We wanted to use something like Montserrat. We could choose that from there. You can see the font now updates. And if we want to, we can change the font weight on there. And if we wanted to, we could also say that they're going to be uppercase. So you can see we can easily come in and adjust things, adjust the sizing, all those kinds of options. And there we go. We can just basically do that through all the different headings 1 through to 6 to make sure that all the colors, the size, the styles, fonts, all those kinds of things have been set up. Buttons is exactly the same. We can come in and control the button typography, text shadow, the normal and the hover state, the background colors, any border radius, and so on. Form fields, images, and we also have custom CSS at the end of it. Now, the custom CSS would apply to the global styling of your site, not specifically to a page. So just bear that in mind. Once we've done that, we can click on Update. That will now make any changes throughout your entire site. Now I've gone ahead, added in the menu structure just so I can show you how easy it is before we move on and take a look at the footer to make changes and customize this the way that we want. So what we can do if we want to is we can easily come into any of these and make any adjustments we want. So we can click on the image, We'll come into that. You can see we've got margins at the top and bottom. Let's just set those to be a little smaller. So we'll do 10 at the top, 10 at the bottom, just so we tighten that up a little bit. And if we come over to our menu widget, so you can see there's our nav menu widget, we've got a green color inside there, which obviously doesn't make sense because it's not using the color scheme that we've set up. So what we're going to do is we're going to come into the style section, and inside there we can adjust the typography, we can adjust the drop down, the toggle button, all of those kinds of things. So if we just go to the hover section, you can see there's the pointer color that's being used, this sort of green color. We're going to change that for our blue, and we'll find where we mouse over. Now we've got blue. With the drop down, if we wanted to, we could adjust things inside there. So we'll hit update. Once we've done that, we'll jump back onto our test page, refresh that. You can see that's now tightened things up. The right colors are being used and so on. Next of all, let's take a look now at creating a footer. From the theme builder, we're going to jump to the footer section and we say add new footer. You can see footers pre-selected. And again, we're going to do the same thing. So default footer, click on create template. Once we do that, that'll take us over and we can now take a look at the blocks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find something that I think is kind of in keeping to what we've been doing. We'll insert that into our template. So that now puts our design into the page. Obviously, there are a couple of things we need to sort out. The colors are all wrong at this point in time, so we need to correct that. It's very easy. All you need to do is click on any of the items. Simply come up to the style tab and you can just change this color to whatever you want. You could literally take it out of there or you can set the color. So let's just clear that. And then that will pick up any default colors that you've set up as part of your theme style. If you want to override that, you can simply come in and choose the color that you want. So let's just set it to this pale blue, for example, and do the same with our button underneath. We'll come into our button, come to our style section. I'm going to come down to our button, change that, set that to our blue color, and we're now getting things back to the way they should be. Same goes for the little line at the top. We simply come to our style section, come to our border, reset that to be our pale blue. And finally, we've got the navigation. We're just going to set that to our blue as well. Okay, so that's our footer section all set up. Hit publish and we get the same thing again. We can now add our condition. So we're going to click on add condition and we're going to leave that set to entire site. Hit save and close. That's now our footer section. So let's come back out to our website, refresh our test page, scroll down the page. Once we get to the bottom, there's our new footer section all set up in place. And now every single page, if we go to one of the posts, you can see our footer section is all inside there. So let's just jump over to the archive tab. Again, we're presented with that same option that says create your first whatever we're choosing. So we'll say create our new archive. We're going to call this default post archive. We'll create our template. Once we create our template, we're going to be brought into the blocks area. So what we're going to do is we're going to close this down. It's going to take us into our template area now. And as you can see, our header is in place and our footer is in place. Let's create our archive. So when we open up an archive template, you can see an archive theme template. You can see on the left-hand side, we've got three icons to start off with in our widgets: the archive title, the post, and the author box. Because we've chosen an archive for this particular theme file, it knows that those are probably the kind of things that we're going to want to do. Let's pull in the archive title. We'll just drag and drop that widget in. You can see that just pulls in some pre-hold template information. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a bit of space to this. So we're simply going to come over to this particular block. Now you can see we've got a bit of an issue here because it's so close to the actual navigation. When we try to get to the little block, it makes it very difficult. We can deal with that quite easily. We can simply come over and use the navigator option. Click to open the navigator up. You can see now on the right hand side we've got a new entry, at which point this will show us all the key sections. Now it's worth bearing in mind at this point in time the header and the footer are not considered to be a section inside the archive template that we're creating. So that's why you're not seeing those there. It's only showing us the actual section we've just dropped in. But what we can do is we can click on that. That'll activate the section, and now we can come over on the left hand side and we can use the options inside here. So let's just say we're going to uncheck these values. At the top we're going to add in 50 pixels of spacing. Now we've given ourselves a bit of breathing space at the top. So let's come back over to our widgets on the left hand side and let's just drag in the archive posts and drop that underneath the title. You can see that now pulls in the basic layout for an archive page. Let's just close this navigator down now on the right hand side again. So you can see this is giving us the title at the top and 3 posts from our archive. If we do it this way, we now have a lot of control over exactly how we can style things, how we can lay things out. Now you still have the same level of control if you were using one of the predefined blocks. However, you have a starting point, then you might have to make changes to everything. This just starts off with only the elements you want to drag in. With that being said, we can simply choose this. We can choose a different skin if we want to, and a skin is just basically the design that's going to be used. Currently it's using the classic. Let's change that over to cards. That already looks a lot cleaner and a bit more modern. We've also got a third option, which is full content. And it's not the nicest looking, but it's kind of what you'd expect as part of the default way that most themes work in WordPress. We're going to take this back and we're going to go to the cards because I think that's the nicest looking option we have. Now, all these different pieces of components inside this particular layout can be controlled. So we could say the number of columns, we could say we only want to put 2 columns in. You can see that immediately updates. Do we want to show the image? We can say yes or no. So we could get rid of the image completely if we wanted to. We'll put that back to yes. Image size, you can see it looks a little bit pixelated at the moment. It doesn't look the best. So we can choose a different image size. So we can go to the medium and you can see that now looks a lot better, a lot clearer. The image ratio is basically how we can deal with the height and the size of this image. So if we just drag this down a little bit, you can see we can position that to get a much nicer looking layout. So if we just adjust this a little bit, I think about 56 is going to work perfectly for the ratio that I've got set up for all of my thumbnails. We've also got uncategorized, which is just basically the metadata saying what taxonomy this is associated with. So we can get rid of any of these kinds of things, including things like titles and excerpts and so on. So you can see we can take the title out if we wanted to. We can put that back in. We can remove the excerpt. We can change how much of an excerpt there actually is. We might say we want 30 words in there to give us a little bit more. So you can see we can fine tune and configure this exactly as we want to. We also come at the bottom, we can say we want to put some pagination in there. So we're going to say numbers, we're going to say that numbers and previous and next. So when we get more actual entries into our blog in the archive pages, we'll have nice pagination at the bottom. So now that we're happy with the way that our new archive page is set up, we're going to click on publish, and again we're brought back to those conditions. If we click on add condition this time, you can see we've got all archives is set up as the include condition. Now if we click to expand that, we now start to see some more of those options that I talked about from this context menu. So because we're dealing with an archive, there are quite a few different types of archives throughout a typical WordPress site. But you can see we've got all archives which will apply this template no matter what. So it'll do it site-wide for every single archive that's going to be used. For a lot of cases, that might be perfectly fine. However, if you want more granular control, you can choose different archives for different page layouts. So author archives could be different from the date archive, from the search results page. Then underneath the post archive, you can see we've got the post archive, categories, direct children or direct child categories of. So if we chose something like that, you can see that now opens up another option, at which point we can then come in and we can filter even lower. But we're going to set this to be nice and simple and say all archives. We'll hit save and close, and we've now created the archive layout for our WordPress site. So let's just jump back over now into our test page, come back to our home. And as you can see now, that's picked up the archive layout that we've just chosen. So everything is now set up the way that we want. If we click then to go into one of these, you can see we still have the single template that we need to update to make sure that looks as good as it possibly can. We're going to come into Theme Builder, come to the single option, add new single. What we're going to do now is you can see it says single, select the post type. We're going to click on there. Now this is where things can get a little confusing when you're working with WordPress. You may consider the fact that we've chosen a single and that's going to be for a single post. Why is that related to both posts and pages and the 404 page? Surely a post and a page is different. Well, the way that WordPress works is it considers pretty much everything to be a post. And when you group those posts together, it considers that to be an archive. In other words, a group of posts. So once you kind of get that concept into your head, you stop thinking of them being different. They just have slightly different options. So we can set up a single template for both posts and pages and the 404 page. So they can all be different. For this example, we're going to start with the post. So I'm going to click on post, and we're just going to call this default single post. We hit create template. That'll take us in now, and we can choose any of the predefined blocks if we want to use one of those as a starting point. So let's just choose a design that I think is quite tidy and in keeping with what we're doing. So let's just insert this particular one. That'll download all the relevant files now and drop the design into our page for us. So you can see there's all the layout all set up inside our design. Now we can, again, like I say, make complete and utter changes to this. So you can see that the image at the top doesn't look quite right. Or we could come to that image there and you can see we can adjust the height of this. So we could say we want to set that to be 600, for example. We'll apply that. And you can see that'll adjust things accordingly. So we can go through now, configure this, make any changes from this basic template that we've set up, that we've chosen, and you can easily come in and make any changes. So we'll hit publish on there. You can see again, we've now got conditions set up. And again, we've got a range of different options. If we open up the post section, you can see there are even more options inside here to get to a really granular level of control. Now you could, if you wanted to, set this as a global value for all singular. Obviously that may not always make sense. It may be dependent upon the kind of site that you're setting up. So I'm going to leave this set to be posts. You can see that it says next to that is all. However, if we wanted to, we could click on there, we could filter that down to specific posts, or depending upon if we choose something different inside here, we may say in child categories, for example, and then we can click and we can choose different child categories and filter those out. So we'll say posts, we'll say save and close, and that's our single template created. Come back into our page, we'll refresh this now, and there's our new design all set up, pulled in from that template. So our basic theme is now set up. Come back to our home page, you can see we've got our archive. We've got our header, we've got our footer. If we come into any of these items, we've also got the option now to see exactly what we've got laid out as part of that blog post. So that's the basics of those 4 key theme files that we need to set up. Now previously, when we were working with designs and templates and so on, whenever you created an archive or a single, any of those kinds of templates, your header and your footer area, if you wanted to make changes to those, you'd have to literally come out of the page that you're editing and go into either the header or the footer and start editing there. You no longer need to do that. You can come over any of these and you'll see it now shows us in yellow as opposed to the normal blue for the header. And if we scroll to the footer at the bottom, it does the same thing there. We can now, if you want to, simply click on that where it says edit the header or the footer. Click. That will now take us directly into the footer in this example. We can make changes to it. As you can see, we're still in line. We still have the whole sort of the template that we're working with in place. So we can come in, we'll make whatever changes we want. So let's just say we want that logo. We want to set that to be the left. We can now click on update. That's now updated the footer template. And when we're ready to go back to our normal page template, we can simply come back over that. And you can see that now is in yellow. We can click edit single. And you'll find now we're back into editing the single template. Could be the archive template, could be any of the other templates. But you can see it's quick and easy. And the same goes, like I say, for the header. We can click on edit header. We now jump over into the header section and we can now make changes inside here. So we could click on this. We could say, well, this menu at the bottom is kind of annoying me a little bit. So we're going to come onto that. We're going to put some padding at the bottom, for example. Let's just say we're going to put 20 pixels of padding in there. So we made some changes to that, hit update. And then our heading has now been updated. We can just click back on edit single and we carry on editing the single post template. So it makes it much quicker and easier, a lot less round trip editing going on. We can now kind of do inline editing so much quicker and easier, and one of those just little updates that I wanted to bring your attention to because it just makes your life considerably easier. So there's one final thing I want to show you before I wrap this up, and that's global widgets. Now we covered this right back at the beginning and just mentioned we were going to take a look at it. So let me just show you what a global widget is and why I think they're useful, especially when you're working with the whole theme building aspect. Let's just say that you had a testimonial section and you wanted to use this on the same area across all of your archive pages, but you had multiple different templates for those archives. Like we just saw, you can set up multiple different templates for various different parts of your site, even using the same kind of archive or the single and so on. The easiest way to do that would be to set up a global widget. And then if you make a change to one of those, you can have that reflect upon all of your templates. So let me just show you how we do that. We're going to add a new page. Doesn't really matter how you do this. I'm just going to use a page as an example to show you the difference between pages and templates and so on. So we're just going to call this global widget. And we'll just publish this page. We'll edit with Elementor. Once the Elementor editor's opened up, we're just going to do a little search for testimonials. So we're going to grab a testimonial widget, drop that into the page. And what we're going to do now is we're going to quickly make some changes to that. So we're just going to add in an image, for example. We'll adjust the font styling and so on, just so we've got something a little bit more unique than the default so we can see the changes we make. So we're just going to set that to be italic Times New Roman. So we'll say we're happy with that. So now what we need to do is save that as a global widget. Now, this is where you have to understand how global widgets work. This is a widget, not a section or anything else. So for example, if we come into the section that contains the widget and we right click, we can say save as template. If we click save as template, we can save it as a template. We can't save it as a global widget. So how do we get around that? Well, you don't. You have to come to the widget that you want to save globally and then right click on that and choose save as global. So now we say save as global. We're going to call this global testimonial widget. Now, you'll see that my naming convention just makes my life easier. If I say global at the beginning, I know this is a global widget, and I know global testimonial widget. Well, I kind of know what it is. It says, it's on the tin. Hit save. Once we do that, you'll see now where we normally have just the element, and we've got all our normal widgets inside there. If we come to the global section, we'll now have a list of all of the global widgets we have. And you'll see they've also got this little sort of yellowy orange folder in the top left hand corner. That just denotes that we've got a global widget. So now let's update this page so we can see everything is set up in there. Let's come out of this now, go back to our dashboard, and we're going to come into our template section, into our theme builder. We're going to go into our default single. We're going to edit that with Elementor, and we're going to put this at the bottom of every one of our single post templates. So we're going to come into this. We're going to just add that global widget in. So we're going to click to add a new section in. We can style this section any way we want. Like I say, it's independent of the actual global widget. So we'll click on that. We'll just put a bit of spacing above and below just so we can make a bit of room on there. So we'll do 50 at the top and 50 at the bottom. So we've got a bit of space. Now we come back into our widgets. Come to global. There's our global testimonial widget. We can drag and drop that onto our page, and you can see that drops it in there. But it also gives us some additional options. We can edit the global widget, or we can unlink it from global. If we edit the global widget, any changes we make to that will be reflected throughout the entire site that's linked to that global widget. If we want to unlink it and make a change to this one that doesn't reflect on all those other global widgets, we can do that. We basically unlink its global connection. Hope that makes sense. So we'll say update on there. So we've now got this global widget set up. Now then, let's just come back out of this. We can see we've got the lorem ipsum text from John Doe. So we say we're happy with that. Everything is all set up. We'll exit to our dashboard. We'll come back to our initial page that's got that in there. So we're going to come into our global widget. We'll edit that with Elementor. And what we're going to do is we're going to change the text a little bit. So we're going to click on this. We're going to click edit. And then what we're going to do is we're going to grab this and we're just going to duplicate it. So we'll put two lots of the same thing there. So we've now got more text in there. We'll hit update. That's now updated this instance of it, but also if we come back and take a look at one of our single pages, we'll just refresh that, scroll down, and you can see now that's also been reflected in this particular section as well. So that link means it's a two-way link. We can update it on one and then that'll reflect right the way throughout our site. So this is a great way of doing things like you may have a sign-up form for your mailing list. Then if you quickly wanted to change your provider from something like MailChimp to MailerLite, you can make one change and then that will be reflected upon the entire site everywhere that uses that global widget. Super simple and a real time saver. So now that you've seen how to build your own theme files and start to develop your own themes, what's next? Well, how about we move on to working with dynamic tags? Now, dynamic tags are a great way of creating more complex websites without needing to get your hands dirty on any coding whatsoever. So in this video, I'm going to demonstrate how you use tags, what they're for, and how we can just combine those with various different aspects inside Elementor and WordPress. Then in the next portion of this video, we're going to move on and use the same techniques, but we're going to combine those with a tool called Advanced Custom Fields. This opens up even more possibilities for more unique websites. So if this has whet your appetite, join me as I take you through how we can work with dynamic tags in Elementor Pro. Now, before we fire up Elementor, let's get two important things out of the way first of all. This is a Pro-only feature. If you don't have Elementor Pro, you won't be able to take advantage of what we're going to cover in this video. So please bear that in mind. Secondly, what exactly are dynamic tags? So according to the Elementor documentation, dynamic content or dynamic tags draws content from the website or from the current page or post, changing dynamically according to the page or post it's on. So what exactly does that even mean? Well, I've opened up a unstyled page on the test site we're going to be taking a look at, and we're just going to take a look at what you normally see as an archive. So if you're creating a blog or something like that, you'll have your posts listed in an archive, and each one of those listings inside an archive would have things like the featured image, an excerpt, the title, some other information, maybe some meta tags with the date, the author, and so on. All of those pieces of information are dynamic tags. So when you're creating templates and things like that, you use those dynamic tags to fill out placeholders that will change based upon the page or post that you're currently looking at. So armed with that basic knowledge, what exactly can we do? Well, we can create custom templates, we can create different items on the page, we can reference all that data, we can do a whole ton of different things with it. We are going to keep this really simple though, so I'm not going to be delving into templates and theme builders and all those kinds of things. That's its own dedicated video, but this is a good starting point to understand how dynamic tags work and how we can use them to do quite a few different cool things. So with that being said, let's just jump over into a page and let's take a look at some of the real basic things we can do and how they can really spice up a website. So let's start off with a really simple example. How about some personalization when someone lands on your page? Let's take a look at how we could do that. So what we're going to do is we're just simply going to drag and drop in a heading. So we're going to drop that into our page as normal. So if you're used to working with headings and things, you can quite happily type information in, either into this title area or into the actual box itself on the page. However, you've probably also noticed that when you see some of these different things, you've got some extra options available to you, and these are denoted by these little sort of like database symbol in the corner. This is the dynamic tags option. So let's click and expand that. And once you expand that, we have a ton of different options available. Now we're not limited to these. A lot of these different options have more options inside them, and we'll see that in a moment. So as you can see, things are broken down into various categories. We've got post, we've got archive, we've got site, we've got media, and we've got author, and finally comments. Now you'll see this change depending upon the type of widget that you're using, so you won't always see all of these, and there are some things that you're not seeing in here that you may see in other widgets. But once you understand the whole concept of dynamic tags, you can see how they work and how you can start to reference them. So for that personalization, let's come down and we're going to say we want to drag some user info in. So we're going to say, click on user info, everything disappears. But what we get now is we get this little section that says title. It says we're using the user info, and we've got this little wrench icon on the left-hand side. Now the little wrench icon is vitally important, especially when you have multiple options underneath one particular data type. So underneath the user info, if we click this, you can see we've got settings and we've got field. We'll click to expand field, and as I said, you can see we've got a lot of different options inside here, all associated with the current user. Now obviously, if you don't have a logged in user, we need to put a fallback option in there, and we'll take a look at how we can handle that as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to say we want to use the display name. We're going to click on that, and you see it immediately pulls up my display name, which is Paul. Which, well, it doesn't really do much, does it? It just says Paul. Well, this is where the advanced option underneath can come in very handy, because we can now put some information before, after, and also put a fallback option in there. So what we're going to do is we're just going to say hi, we'll put a comma in there. So it now says, hi Paul, makes a bit more sense. And we'll just put at the end of it, how are you today? There we go. We've now created something that's a little bit more personalized. So when someone that's logged in accesses the site, they'll have a nice little personalization message at the top, all dynamically generated based upon their display name. So now we've got that personalization message. What about if someone is accessing the site and they're not logged in? They're going to just see, hi blank, how are you today? Which in some instances would work fine. But what we can do is we can drop a fallback value in there. And that fallback value is only going to be used when someone isn't logged in, so we can't see their username or their display name, and we need to put something in its place where it says my name. So we're just going to put in there visitor, or you could put guest, you could put whatever you want in this. And now anybody that accesses this page that isn't logged in won't see some kind of cryptic message. They'll see something that makes a lot more sense to them, and then if they log in, it'll be replaced by their name. Okay, so that's a really basic example. So we can take those basic pieces of information and we can expand on those and make something a little bit more well, a little bit more interesting, to be honest. So I'm going to quickly put together a simple page, and then we're going to come back and take a look at how we can start pulling in some of that dynamic data. So what we're going to do is we're going to create something that's a little personalized. So it could be something along the lines of a custom dashboard when a user logs in. Could be any manner of different things. So we've got a simple 2-column layout. In the left-hand side, I want to put some details about the logged in user. So we're going to use the same principles as we just saw. We're going to come over, we're going to add in, first of all, a little widget to pull in the profile picture. So we need to grab the image widget. We're going to drag and drop that into the page. We can click to add an image, or we can click on the dynamic tags option. We can click on that. And what we're going to do is, you can see we now get context information specific to working with an image widget. So as you can see, as I said at the top of the video, we'll see different information based upon the types of widget that you choose. So what we're going to do is we've got the user profile picture. So we're going to click on that, and that'll pull in the profile picture that's associated with my account. As you can see, there's my image at the top. So now I can just go ahead and style that any way I want. So let's come into the styling options. We'll set our border radius to 100 pixels, and we get a nice circular image. And we'll just do something simple like just drop in a border on this. We'll say a solid border that's going to be 5 pixels, and it's going to be white. So there we go. There's our white color. There's our image at the top, all laid out the way we want. Add a little bit of space to this section, and what we'll do is just come to advanced, and we're going to say we're going to add some padding to the top and bottom. So we're going to say 50 pixels padding to the top and 50 to the bottom. So we've now dropped in a user profile picture. We'll set that all where we want to. Next, we're going to come back in. We're going to grab a heading option. We're going to drop that underneath there. We'll center align this, set this to something like H4, and we'll change our color on there a second so we can see what we're doing as we go through. So there we go. So the next thing we want to do now is just pull in our username. So we're going to go back into the content area, click on our little dynamic tags option, and like we did earlier on, we're going to scroll down until we get to the user info section, click on user info, click on the little wrench icon, and we're just going to choose the display name. Come to advanced, and we're just going to say, hi, Paul, and after we're just going to put a comma, welcome to your dashboard. Super simple. Okay, so next thing you want to do is just make sure that all sits nice and tidy. So you're going to come back in, and we're just going to put this padding all the way around. We'll put 50 all the way around. There we go. That looks a bit better, and we'll just quickly style our text a little better. We don't want this to be all uppercase. We're just going to say we want this to be normal, so it has a bit more, it's not quite so formal, should we say. We'll lighten the weight up a little bit, and we'll adjust the line height on there as well. So we've now created a fully dynamic welcome message. So that's pretty cool. So now we've put that information in, let's add some more data in just so we can personalize this a little more. What we're going to do is we're going to come back over, we're going to drag and drop another heading underneath. We're going to give this a bit of space, so we're just going to come into the settings for this, into advanced. We're going to put some padding at the top, an extra 50 pixels there and 50 at the bottom to separate things out. And we're just going to give this a title. So we're going to come back in, and we're just going to say website details. Now this isn't particularly important what we're sort of doing here. This is more just to demonstrate the kinds of things that you can do with dynamic data. So let's just drag another heading underneath there. We're going to set this to be something like H5. We'll set the style to be white. And from there, we can now just pull in some extra data. So let's come back over, click on our dynamic tags again, and we're going to scroll down to the site information. So from there, we can see we can put in things like the page title, the site tagline, site title, current date and time, some useful information. So we'll just say we're going to pull in the site title. You can see it's just my WordPress because I haven't changed anything on there. And what I can do then if I wanted to is I can duplicate this just to save us a little bit of time. We'll come back over then where it says site title. We'll click to get rid of that. We'll change it to a different dynamic tag, and we'll just say we'll have the site tagline. So that will sit underneath it. Finally, we're going to click on this one more time, duplicate that again, and we're going to just delete, come back in, and this time we're just going to go down and we're going to say current date and time. And there we go. We've now put those pieces of information in, and again, if we want to, we can just add in anything before, anything after, and a fallback. So we'll just put in there current time. And there we go. So that set those things up. So these are really basic pieces of information, but you can see how easy it is to pull in that dynamic data, those dynamic tags, and use them. Now let's move on to something a little bit more interesting. I've now come over into the theme builder that's part of Elementor Pro, and while this isn't about theme building, I'll put a link in the description below to a video that'll take you through all of that. This is a good way to see how you pull in the relevant data, the relevant dynamic tags, into a template you may want to create. So just to give you a grounding in what dynamic tags are and how they work in this context, because this is probably where you'll spend most of your time working with dynamic tags. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a very simple archive page. So we're going to click to create an archive, and we'll say add new archive. We'll just name this test archive, and we'll create the template. Once you've done that, you're taken over then into the blocks editor, where you can take a look at using any of the predefined layouts. But obviously we don't want to do that. We want to see how this all works. So we're going to close this down, and we're going to just create some basic pieces of a typical archive page, so we can then take a look at how various different things work. Now, you do have these options for archive title, archive post, and author box. However, you can also do a lot yourself. So what we can do is we can simply come over and start adding our own content in. So let's just say we want to get a bit more creative. We're going to click to add a new section at the top of the page. From there, we're going to come into the style, and we're going to set a background image inside there. So you're just going to choose an image, and I'm going to pull up something like this. Insert that picture, and what we're going to do, we'll just quickly position this and just set up some basic parameters to make sure that everything looks good. So no repeat, and we're going to say we want this to be cover. Then we're going to set the height on this. So we're going to say this is going to be, oops, wrong one. We're going to come in and we're going to say height, minimum height. We'll adjust that to be about there. That'll do. Quickly come into style, and we're just going to put a background overlay on there so we can just see what we're going to put on a little better. So we'll just put a background overlay, which is black. There we go. That's looking good. So once we've done that, we now need to have a way of pulling in that dynamic data. And as we've just seen, it's pretty simple to do. So we're going to come back out. We're going to go in this time into our heading and drag and drop that onto the page. We can click now and choose the dynamic tags, and from there we've got additional options. You can see we've got archive, and we can pull in the archive description, the archive meta, and the archive title. So let's create our own title on here. Let's click to insert the normal title, and as you can see it currently says archives because it's just basically a placeholder. So we'll style that, set that to be white, and we'll just quickly adjust the typography on there to make it stand out a little better. There we go. So we've got the title of this particular archive in there, but it doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? So how do we see real life data inside here so we can make sort of more informed decisions on how we design things? Well, Elementor makes that super easy. If we come down to the little settings icon in the bottom left hand corner, we can come down to the preview settings. Inside there we can choose what we want to use as the sort of source for our layouts, our data, and so on. So we can click and we can choose what we want from there. So we're going to choose the categories archive, and from there we're going to just choose, don't want to use all, we want to choose a specific one. So I'm going to search for blog, and there we go, blog posts. So once I hit apply and preview, you'll see this data will change, and we'll see a little bit more relevant information inside there. So we've now got our category says it's blog post. So this is just an example. Because it's dynamic data, whatever category we go to, this will change accordingly. So this is the beauty of it, and I'll show you that in a couple of moments. So this is the first thing. We've put in the title. Let's do the same thing again. Let's drag and drop another heading underneath there. We'll set this to something like H5, and we'll just quickly style this so we can see it. We'll adjust the typography quickly, and we'll just set this to be normal. And finally, we'll just configure what information is going to be in there. So dynamic tags again, scroll down, and we're just going to choose archive description this time. And that will pull in any description we've associated with this specific archive. So we created the title, and we've done the basics of this. Let's just drop in the archive itself now. So we're going to keep this really super simple. I'm going to come back out, and we'll just grab the archive posts and drop that inside there. Make a little bit of space for it, so we'll put 50 pixels above and below. There we go. And we'll just click on this, and we'll change that to be cards, just so it looks a little bit nicer. There's still plenty of styling and things you could do to this, but this is more a case of, this is just pulling the data in. I wanted to show you how we can actually pull in dynamic tags. So we've now created a very simple archive page. I'm going to publish this, and I'm simply going to add a condition. So this is for all archives. Now, all this condition kind of thing is all covered in a lot more detail in the tutorial about dealing with the whole theme builder as part of Elementor Pro. But we've created an archive now, so let's go back to our test site and take a look at what we've just done. So I've added a couple of menu items for our different blog sections. You can see we've got blog and we've got news. So when I choose the blog posts, you can see it tells us category is blog posts. There's our little subheading underneath, and there's the posts we've got associated with that specific category. If we choose the news items, you can see everything updates, and we see the different news items underneath, but all done inside that one simple file. So all this dynamic data just means that we can create a template file, and then we can pull in all the dynamic data, and as we move through different posts, different categories and so on, all of that will update accordingly. So this is one of the benefits of being able to use dynamic content or dynamic tags. Really does open up the possibility of minimizing your work and maximizing the results from it. So there's one more thing I want to show you in another way in which you can use these dynamic tags. If you're using a tool like Advanced Custom Fields or Pods or Toolkit, we can reference dynamic data from there. Now, if this is something that's beyond you and you've never used these and you have no intention, well, you could end the video at this point if you have no interest in this whatsoever. However, if you are interested, maybe this will open your eyes to some of the things you can do and how you can use it with the various different widgets. So what I've done is I've created a very simple meta field that just gives us a progress slider, nothing more than that, between 0 and 100. And we're going to use a widget to display that. Now, the reason we're doing it this way is because with dynamic data, it makes it a little bit more difficult to pull data that's associated with posts and things into a normal page. We're going to be using a single template. So we're going to come up to the single, and from there, we're just going to create a new single template, and we're just going to open that up and say it's going to be a post. So once we've done that, we're going to call this test single. Create our template. And we're going to end up with a blank template now. We can close out of this, a blank template that allows us to do exactly the same as we did with the archive. We can pull in and build up a template based upon the single post content. So let me just show you what I'm talking about. Let's take a look at our news items. And if we click to go and take a look from our archive page, this is the single post template. In other words, this is where you'll see the actual post itself. And at the moment, you can see it's not styled at all. So we're going to create that. So what I'm going to do is use these options on the left-hand side in conjunction with how I've showed you to create the metadata. So what we're going to do is we're going to use these because these are specific to creating a post template. So it just makes the whole process a little quicker. So we're going to drag and drop our post title in. We're going to come back up. We're going to drag and drop our featured image in. And we're going to drag and drop our actual post content in. So let's just put that underneath post content. We'll drop that in there. So this is just pulled in those relevant bits of data. Now, each of these are dynamic data. They're going to be changed depending upon what post you look at. What we're going to do though is we're going to add in another widget at the bottom that says the progress of this particular project. So we're going to click to drop in a heading. We'll do that underneath, and we'll just put this, and we'll just change that to project progress. And then finally, we're going to come back to our widgets, and we're going to look for the progress option. So there's our progress bar. We're just going to drag and drop that underneath our project progress title. And from there now we can set dynamic data. So you can see we can set a dynamic title. We don't need to worry about that. We're just going to call this progress. But what we can do is we can set the actual value. So you can see at the moment it says percentage and it's set to 50, and that's exactly what you can see. However, we can click on the dynamic tags, open that up, and you can see if we scroll down, we have ACF now added at the bottom. Because we've got Advanced Custom Fields installed, we now have some extra options to the relevant sections, the way we can work with dynamic tags. So we're going to click on ACF number field. Then we just need to click on the little wrench icon, and from there we can choose the key. And as before, the key is just literally the field that we want to use to supply the data. So we're going to click, and you can see it tells us progress is the option we have, which is the numeric field. We can click on that, and that will then use that for the percentage of exactly where we are. So you can see at the moment this project is 30% in. You can use any other data you want. So if you wanted to pull in this, for example, we want to change the name to a dynamic name, we could do that. We could create a new field specifically for that. The same for progress. You can do whatever you want on there. You can tie these fields in together. It's all very, very simple to do. So that's 3 different ways in which we can use this dynamic data. Now, if we quickly publish this template, we'll just set the condition. That's perfectly fine, and say save and close. I'm going to come back over now to our test site. We're going to scroll back up and refresh our page. Come to our projects tab, and you can see there's our project. If we click to open that up and scroll down the page, there's our progress bar, all dynamically generated to see exactly what value we have in there. And obviously you can change that value to whatever you want between 0 and 100, and then this will refresh itself and show the relevant data. And this is the beauty of working with these dynamic tags as part of Elementor Pro. They just open up a ton of possibilities in how you can link and reference and use various different types of data throughout your entire projects. So in this section, we're now ready to delve a little deeper into some of the other things we can do and combine with Elementor Pro. We're going to be taking a look at Advanced Custom Fields. Advanced Custom Fields is a fantastic platform for creating way more advanced WordPress websites. We'll combine this with the dynamic tags we've just covered, just to open up a whole ton of really interesting possibilities. So if this has whet your appetite, let me take you through how you can use ACF alongside Elementor Pro. I've already gone ahead and downloaded and installed Advanced Custom Fields, Elementor, and Elementor Pro. Now with Advanced Custom Fields installed, let's take a quick look at the Custom Fields options, a brief overview if you will. If we take a look on the left hand side now, we have Custom Fields, and inside there we have 3 options. If you have the Pro version, you'll have an additional option that just says license, which you can go in, put in your serial number, and then you can have access to any of the updates of the Pro version as and when they actually come out. For the free version, we just get 3. We've got field groups and we've got add new. Now field groups will just list all of the custom field groups that we've created. And all a field group really is a way of grouping together the custom meta fields that we're going to create. So let's take a look at add new. And what that'll do is that'll allow us to go in and start creating our first ACF field groups. Now the screen is broken down into 4 distinct sections, and we'll cover each one of these in more detail as we go through setting up our first set of fields. You can see at the top we've got the title, which we can put in the name of this particular field group. So naming these to make sense, a logical kind of naming system, is going to be something that's very useful to you if you create more complex sites in the future. Next up, we've got the actual fields themselves, and this is where we create the different kinds of field types. So we've got things like text fields, image fields, file upload fields, and a whole range of different options as part of ACF. After that, we've got the location settings. Now these are rules that we can set up to specify exactly where our custom fields are going to be listed. So we've got a range of different places we can do this. We can choose from post types, templates, formats, categories, user roles, forms, a whole range of different things that we can use to trigger where we use these particular field groups. Next, we've got the sort of qualifier. Is it equal to or is it not equal to? And then finally, what we actually check it against. So things like post, page, template. And these will change depending upon what kind of thing you choose. So for example, if we say post category, you'll see that changes now, and we'll have things like uncategorized. And if we create additional post categories, or your taxonomy, if you want to call it that, these will be listed inside there. So depending upon what you choose in the first option, will dictate what you'll see in the last option. And like I say, we will come back and take a look at how we can set some of these up as we go through and create our first field group. Next, we've got the settings section, and this is where you can fine-tune and configure exactly where and how you want ACF to interact with WordPress. So you can see we can make this field group active, or we can deactivate it. This just means you can create field groups and then you can deactivate them if you don't want to use them, or you can then reactivate them as and when you need to. We've then got things like the style, which allows us to choose whether you want to have standard, which is your WordPress meta boxes, or if you want seamless integration. These are more visual than actually sort of technical. It's just how they actually show up on the page that you're using them on. Next, we've got the position. Do you want them normal after the content, high after the title, or at the side, so you have that on the right hand side of your actual page? Next up, we've got the label placement. So if you're using labels when you create your meta fields, you can have control over exactly where these are listed. Are they top aligned or left aligned? Then we've got the instruction placement. So if you apply instructions to more complex fields that you may create as part of your field group, you can put some instructions inside there, and then you can dictate exactly where these will be displayed inside the actual dashboard. Order number just specifies where they'll be listed down the left-hand side inside the hierarchy of your dashboard. And then description, which will again show up inside the left-hand side section. And finally, we have the hide on screen options. When you create custom post types, for example, or you integrate this into an existing post type as part of WordPress, you can control exactly what is or isn't going to be displayed. This gives you a more granular control over making sure that you don't have information inside your custom post or inside your posts that use the sort of metadata that we're going to create inside ACF. You can control exactly what's displayed and what's not displayed. So this can be very useful if you want to keep things very, very simple, if you're offloading this to a client or they don't have access or need for any of these options. We'll take a look at some of these as we go through, and we'll change and configure things, and I'll show you exactly how some of these display. But for now, that's the overview of exactly how you create your custom meta fields inside ACF. Now that we've seen what field groups are, let's create our first field group in ACF, and let's associate that with posts. Now what we're going to do for this example is keep it pretty straightforward, but we're going to use it as a good example of how you can enhance what's already inside WordPress with ACF fields. We're going to use the example of creating some additional information about vehicles, and we're going to associate that then with our posts. So what we're going to do, first of all, is give this a name, and we're just going to say vehicle details. Now this is more for you than for anything else. This isn't going to be displayed on the front end of the website. This is just so you know exactly what this particular field group is associated with. Great if you are using just one or two field groups, it's not so important. But if you build more complex sites, it makes sense to get into a naming convention that makes it very clear and obvious what every single field group actually relates to. Now we've done that. Before we move on and start actually putting in the fields we want to use, let's tell it where we want to use it by using the location option. Now at the top, we've got post types, post templates, status, and so on. For this, we're just going to simply come in and say post type. Then we're going to say is equal to, and if we click to expand that out, even though it says post type, we've got pages and templates and fonts and icon sets and so on. However, we know we want to associate this with a post, so we're just going to click on post and leave that as it is. Very, very simple rule. So now anytime we create a new post, these custom fields will be associated and available to us. If we wanted to get even further in control of this, we could use additional options inside our location rules, or we could use rule groups. However, that's a little beyond what I want to cover in this beginner's guide to using ACF with WordPress. Next up, we're going to come down to the settings section, and primarily we're going to leave almost everything intact. We don't need to worry too much about this. However, we will come back a little later and I'll show you how some of these actually influence the way things are laid out inside your post editor. For now, we'll leave them as they are. So there's the first part done. We've named this, we've set the location up where we want to use it, and any settings we may think we need to apply. The next thing we need to do is start adding in the fields. This is very easy. All we need to do is click on Add Field, and that'll open up a range of options. Now this is very context based, so depending upon the field type that you choose, you'll see different options open up below. So before we start filling anything in, let me just demonstrate what I'm talking about. At the moment, text is set up, and you can see we've got things like default value, placeholder text, prepend, append, and so on. However, if we come down and we choose something like file, you'll see that now opens up a range of different options. So we've got things like return value, file array, file URL, file ID. All these things sound quite complicated, but the reality is it's just how the data is going to be stored inside the database, inside ACF. So don't worry too much about this. I'll explain some of these as we go through, and then you take a look at some of the more advanced videos that we've got. Once you've kind of got a good understanding of how ACF works, you'll see these being used in different contexts throughout some of those videos. So if you are interested in this, take a look at those further videos and see exactly how you can start to utilize these various different options. So for now, let's put this back to text. And what we're going to do is we're going to give the field a label. Now the label is basically the name that's going to be displayed inside your editor, your post editor. So we want this to be nice, clear, plain English. So we'll just say vehicle manufacturer. If we click then into the next field, that's the field name. Now this is automatically generated. You can, if you want to, change that to anything whatsoever. The only thing you have to make sure that you do is you don't leave any spaces between any of the words that you use. Either use an underscore or use a dash. There always has to be something like that in there, otherwise you will encounter problems. Then, like I say, we've got the field type. Instructions, let's just put something really simple in here just so I can demonstrate how this is going to be displayed. So we'll just say insert vehicle manufacturer. There we go. We'll just correct that spelling mistake. There we go. Is this required? We'll say yes, because obviously if we're going to put a vehicle in there, we want to make sure that the vehicle manufacturer is included in there. Then we've got default value. Do we want to put a default value inside here? Well, no, because we don't know what the vehicle is going to be. But in some instances, you may want to have a default value. Placeholder text, all that really means is it'll put some placeholder text into this particular field type, which will be replaced as soon as you type anything in there. It's also worth bearing in mind it's only placeholder text. It won't be added to the database if you don't put anything in there. Prepend just basically means something that appears before the input, and append is something that appears after. So you could have something like the pound sign or the dollar sign for beforehand, or you could have a unit of measurement to be afterwards with using the append option. Character limit, if you want to limit this to a set number of characters, you can do that. If you leave it blank, there's no limit. And then we've got conditional logic. Now, I'm not going to go into conditional logic, but I will give you a quick overview of what it actually is. Now, you can have multiple different field types inside here, and you can use conditional logic to display or hide them based upon whatever criteria you want to set. So if we click on conditional logic, you can see we get something that looks very familiar to what we had at the top, where we choose exactly what we want to actually display this particular post type. But this is only going to work on a field level. So this particular field, if we match any of the criteria, we can either display it or hide it. I hope that makes sense. So you can see show field if, and we click on there, and you can see at the moment we don't really have anything in there. But when you start to get extra fields in there, we can reference those to specify whether something is hidden or shown. So we may say that we wanted a year of manufacture, and then once you put that year of manufacture in, if it meets a certain criteria, another field may pop up that's specific to a vehicle that was only manufactured after that year. Anything that's prior to that wouldn't be displayed. Again, like I say, I hope that makes sense. Then we've got the qualifier, which would basically be how do you want to compare the values, and then finally the value at the end of it. So that's the basics of conditional logic, and like I say, that's beyond what I want to cover in this beginner's primer. Let's just turn that off, and then we've got wrapper attributes. If you want to, you can set some attributes inside here, then you could reference those with CSS and other things just to make sure that if you wanted to customize any of the fields that you create inside ACF, you can do that by using the wrapper attributes. Okay, so there's our first field. We can click at the top to hide that, and we can say, let's add another field in. So this time we're going to just say vehicle color. Again, we click down in the field name, you can see it automatically puts in that underscore. Field type, we can leave that as is. Instructions, we'll just say vehicle color. Correct that spelling. Required, yes. Default value, all those kinds of things, we're going to leave those as they are. So that's some basic text fields. Let's take a look at adding a different field type in. I'm going to add a new field, and this time we're going to say vehicle, and we're going to say engine. Let go underneath. This time we're going to change this now. We want them to be able to pick what engine type it is, whether it's a diesel, whether it's a hybrid, whether it's a petrol, you name it, we can sort of add that in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to click and change this from text. I'm going to come down, and you can see we've got things like checkbox, select, and so on. We're going to say select. Once we do that, we now get some different options. Instructions, if we want to put that in, again, we can drop instructions in there. We're going to say we want this to be required. And then we've got the choices. And you can see we can do it in one of two ways. We can put a choice, and we can have a value, and we can have a label if we wanted to. So we could say we want this to be petrol. And then we can put a space, a full colon, and then we can put petrol at the end of it. Now, this is obviously the kind of thing you're thinking, well, if we choose petrol or diesel or something, we don't need to have a label and a value. However, there's going to be instances where you do. You may have the label to be a sort of shortened version, and you could have the value you want to insert to be a long version, or you could have something like it could be text for the actual label with numeric or something like that for the value. So it's up to you how you want to set this up. If you're using the same values for everything, you can, if you want to, simply just put in the one value like so. Which is what we're going to do. I'm going to click underneath, and we're going to put diesel in, we'll put hybrid, and we'll put electric. So we've now created our values. Underneath that, you can see we've got default value. Each default value on a new line. So if you want to put default values in, you can do that if you want to. You can also do things like allow null. So we're going to say no to that. Select multiple values, again, no. Stylized UI doesn't really matter for this example. It's more a case of just demonstrating how this works. Then we've got the return format. So this is a case of, do we want to use the value, the label, or both of those? So you may want to store one or the other, or you may want to store both in your database. Various different reasons why you'd want to do that. We're just going to simply set this to be the label. Conditional logic, we don't need that, and we're not going to worry about wrapper attributes either. So we're going to close this down. I'm going to do one final field type. So we're going to say add field, and we're just going to put in vehicle specifications. Click underneath, and then we can choose the field type. So we're going to click to expand this out. And what we're going to do is we want to have a WYSIWYG editor. In other words, what you see is what you get. So you can get all the normal things like bold, italic, underline, the basic kind of editor you get inside WordPress itself. So what we can do is we can come down and say WYSIWYG editor. Click on there. And you can see now we get some different options again. So we've set it to be required. Now we can set up how do we want this to be used. Do we want to have it fully featured, or do we want to have a very stripped down basic version? So you can see we've got the tabs, visual and text. So we may only want to have this set up to visual only, or visual and text, or text only. Now these are just basically, can you see like the HTML code behind it, or do you want to be able to just sort of see visual text only? Entirely up to you. We're going to leave this visual and text. The toolbar then is, do we want to have the full featured version, so all of the options are available, or do we want to keep this a little bit more basic? We'll say basic. Then we've got the option, say, show media upload buttons. What this means is, do we want to allow people to upload things like images, PDF files, Word files, things like that as part of it? Will it show the media button? We'll say yes for this example. Delay initialization. Now, TinyMCE, in other words, this is the little visual editor you use in, is not initialized until the field is clicked on. This is going to mean that you end up with a slightly quicker load time and you don't have the clutter of that in there. We're going to leave that to no because I want this just to load in straight away. Other than that, everything else is now in place. So we've created our 4 new custom field types as part of our vehicle details. There's one thing I want to draw your attention to before we go any further. You'll notice that every single one of these labels and the names that I use are all prepended with vehicle and then underscore. Now, I always tend to get into this habit because it means if I want to reference one of these later on and I can't think exactly what I've called it, I'll know that if this is vehicle something, or it'll be sort of painting something or book something, I always use that at the beginning to dictate exactly what's going on. So it just means that I'll know that my naming convention just makes it easier further down the line when I want to reference anything like this, because I always use it by using it something like vehicle underscore, book underscore, recipe underscore. Always starts with exactly what that particular field set is all about. Hope that makes sense to you. Okay, so now everything is in place. We're going to click on publish, and we've now created our first field group as part of Advanced Custom Fields. Now, if we want to view any of our field groups, we can come back over to the field groups listing, and that will show us anything we've got inside there. Now, the other thing I want to draw your attention to is it says currently vehicle details. Now, that's kind of pretty self-explanatory, but sometimes that may not always be the case. Now, we can make our lives just a little bit easier by adding something extra in. So let's come back in and edit these vehicle details, this field group. Scroll down to our settings section. And we saw previously you've got description. Well, what we can do is we can put in a little brief description there. And let me just show you what that does. So we can say, whatever we want to call this. So say, list new vehicle details. So we'll just save this again, update that, and we'll come back out to our field groups. And you'll see now we get the name of this particular field group, but we also get this little description at the end of it, which just means identifying what all these different field groups actually relate to can become a lot easier. So that's just something that I think is a little visual thing that makes life just that little easier, and it's something worth taking advantage of on more complex websites that use ACF. So now that we've created our first field group, let's take a look at what it's done to our posts. So we come into our posts on the left-hand side, and we'll come down to all posts. Anything we have will be listed inside here, and you can see we've got the typical hello world. So let's add a new post in, and once we do that, this will open up, and you can see we've now got the normal editor section at the top, which is part of Gutenberg, but we also now have all our custom fields listed below. So vehicle manufacturer, vehicle color, the vehicle engine, which is our drop-down list, which we can pick and choose whatever we want from, and then finally we've got our vehicle specifications, which is our WYSIWYG editor with the add media option, the visual and the text options, and also the slimmed down version of the options that we have as part of the visual editor. So it's simple to include these into the design itself, into your post types. So we've now created that. Next thing we're going to do is take a look at creating some content inside there and taking a look at how we can go back and fine tune and tweak this to make sure that we end up with a great looking setup inside our posts using ACF. Before we take a look at actually setting some of these settings up, it's worth bearing in mind that if you use Gutenberg as your editor in WordPress, some of these options really don't have any effect. However, if you're using the classic editor, you should have more success. So just bear that in mind. Depending upon what editor you use, you may have mixed results. Now, if we take a look, we can do things like, let's just say we want to take the label placement and the instruction placement as an example. So let's just say, to start off with, what it looks like is like this. You can see we've got everything listed out underneath. So that's all pretty sort of seamless and straightforward. However, we can, if we want to, just change things like to left aligned, and we'll say below fields. So this will change our label placement and change the layout structure. So we now come back in and refresh this. We get a slightly different layout. So you can see now we've got the details on the left hand side. We've got the instructions now sit below the field entries. So you can fine tune and tweak this if you want to. Come back out, we'll set those back to the original values. And what we can do, we could just say we want our content position to be on the side. So if you have small content areas and you don't want to sort of make your entire interface sort of looking really complex, you could put the position to the side. And then what that'll do is it'll put your new custom fields inside the right hand column, inside your dashboard, inside your post editor. So you can see now we've got our vehicle details on the right hand side, whereas previously they were underneath this area. So it's up to you how you want to lay things out. It obviously depends upon the content and the way that you want to work. So like I say, just bear in mind that if you're using Gutenberg, you may find you have some slight differences in the way that everything is displayed. Now that we've created all the different custom fields and associated those with our posts, let's just put some simple data in so we can use that in the next stage when we start building the templates. So I've come into my post section, come into add new, and as you can see, I've got the normal editor. On the right hand side, we've got our vehicle details, which is the additional section from advanced custom fields that we're going to fill out. So let's just put some details for a vehicle in. So we're going to call this one the Audi TT Sport. And what we're going to do is we're going to just drop in some filler text for the normal information, and we come over to the right hand side. We'll set our featured image, and we'll just choose the Audi TT. We'll select that. Next up, we can just come in and we can fill out all the details that we want for this vehicle. Now, we could, if we wanted to, when it comes to vehicle manufacturer, we could add in a drop-down list, the same as we've done with the vehicle engine, to reduce any kind of problem where people put incorrect data, misspellings, and so on in. This is just a simple example of how to put extra data in. So when you were using this in a real-world example, you'd set the fields up to be exactly what you would need to minimize any future problems. Okay, so vehicle manufacturer is Audi, vehicle color is red, it's a diesel car, and then we come down and we can drop in the additional specifications. So we've set everything up now. All we need to do is hit publish. That will then add this into our database, and we now have some vehicles. I'm going to do this a couple more times now, so we've got some extra data in here, but this is just a simple way of adding in some sample data that we can use when fleshing out the actual templates. Now in this section, we're going to be taking a look at how we create the single post template, which will output the information to do with the actual vehicle that we're talking about. Now we're going to be using the hello theme for this because it's a kind of blank theme that works really well with Elementor. It means we don't have to worry too much about all the extra bits and pieces that a typical theme will bring along with it. So with that being said, let's take a look at what we're currently working with. If we click through, we take a look at a typical single post. Now this is the details of an individual post. All you can see we've got is the title, we've got the basic information, and the leave a reply option underneath it. So we don't really have much to work with. So we need to rectify this. We need to go in and create that new template. So we come back into our dashboard, and I come down to the template section. We're going to come into theme builder. Now, if you're new to working with the theme builder inside Elementor Pro, it's not as complex as it may first seem. You start off by breaking your themes down into various different components. So if you think of a typical page inside WordPress, you'll have a header, which will have your menu, your logo, and so on. You'll have your footer, which could have additional links, copyright information, and so on. Then you actually have the content of the page itself that sits in between the header and the footer. Now that content can take on many different forms. In this example, we have two different things that we can deal with. We've got the single, which is where you click through and take a look at an actual individual post. And you've got the archive, and the archive lists all the posts in a particular section. So first of all, let's take a look at dealing with the single post. Now we'll take a look at the archive and how we can quickly use Elementor Pro to make a more custom archive. So when we're in the theme builder, all we need to do is click on single. Inside there, that'll give us the option now to create our first single post type. So we're going to click on add single. And in there, we've got the options to specify some basic information. You can see if we select this option, first of all, if we chose single by mistake, we could, if we wanted to, choose a different type of template from page, section, pop-up, and so on. Single is perfectly fine for this example. Then it says select the post type. So we click on there and you can see we can choose between 3 individual values: posts, pages, and the 404 page. We don't want to worry about pages at this point, we just want to concentrate on posts. Now, if this is something you'd like to learn more about, I've got a completely dedicated video on exactly how to use the theme builder as part of Elementor Pro, and I'd recommend taking a look at that if you want to learn more about all the different nuances you have inside this particular page builder and the theme options that are associated with it. I'll put a link in the description below and in the corner so you can take a look at that. So let's just choose post. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to give this template a name, and we're going to call this default single. So we'll know now this is the default template that's going to be used for all of our single post types. So we're going to say create template, and that'll then take us through into the Elementor editor where we can choose from blocks, pages, and any templates we may have created ourselves. We're not going to worry about using anything from here. We're going to start completely from scratch. So we're going to close this down. And we'll end up then basically with a blank template. Now, if you're wondering what this ACF for beginners at the top is, because we haven't associated a header and a footer yet as part of our themes, this is just basically the name of the site. So we can rectify that, and we'll take a look at that after we've created this single post template. Okay, so because we've chosen a single template, single post template, you can see we now have 8 options on the left-hand side grouped together under single. Now, Elementor Pro is smart enough to know that if you're dealing with a single post type, you're probably going to want to use some of these, if not all of these. Let's just do exactly that. First thing we want to do is choose the featured image. So we can simply come over, drag in the featured image widget, drop that on there, and that will pre-fill out the information from one of our posts. Now, if you find you're not seeing what you expect, or you want to change it to a different post, you can do that incredibly easily. All we need to do is come down to the bottom left-hand side, choose settings from the little cog icon, and in there you can see we've got preview settings. If we click and expand that out, first option we have is what dynamic content we want to use to preview. If we click and expand that out, you can see again we've got posts, page, media, 404, and so on. Now, if you're creating custom post types, you may see additional things inside here. And also, if you're dealing with things like if you install WooCommerce, again, you'll see different options available in association with what we have here. We're going to choose post, that's perfectly fine. Now, currently, we're looking at the Audi TT, but let's just say we wanted to change that to the focus that we inserted in here. You can see we've got forward focus. We can say apply and preview, and that'll just update the preview. Now, bear in mind, this is just the preview. Nothing more. This is just there to make your designing the single post template or the archive templates a lot easier, because you can actually see some data inside there. Okay, so there's our vehicle. Let's come down and say we want to drag in the post title. So we'll drop that underneath there. And then you can see we've now pulled in forward focus. We're going to come in and we're going to come back out. We're going to say we want to put in the actual post content. Now, this is all really, really simple and straightforward because we're just using normal, simple parts of a typical page or typical post. Your title, the featured image, and the actual description itself or the content. But how do we go about pulling in that ACF data? That's not quite so straightforward. That's a little bit more complex, surely. Well, not really. What we can do is come back out of this and we're going to just say we want to put in some additional information underneath here. We've got all the options we normally expect to have, things like headings, text editor, images, and so on, and we can reference that information. So what we're going to do is we're going to say we're going to pull in a heading, drop that underneath there, and you can see we've got this dynamic option for both title and the link and various other sections depending upon the widget that we choose. Once we've got that, we can use that to reference the advanced custom fields data. So we've got this filler text in it at the moment, but we want to change that for dynamic content. So let's click on dynamic, and you see that now opens up a range of extra options. We've also got things in there like post date, post excerpt, and so on. So these kind of mimic what you have with those normal single post widgets. And if you wanted to, you could use either or. However, we've also got extra things. If we scroll down, you can see at the bottom, we've got ACF and ACF field. Well, let's click on ACF field and nothing happens. So why doesn't anything happen? Well, basically because all we've done so far is tell it we want to put an ACF field in there. We haven't told it what field we actually want to use. So what we need to do that is click on the little wrench icon, and that will open up then two different sections. We've got the key, which is basically the ACF field name that we want to reference, and advanced. And what the advanced does is it allows us to put some information before, after, or a default fallback value in there. So first of all, let's deal with the settings. Let's just come in and choose the key that we want to use. If we click on there, you can see we have our 4 options available. Now, one thing to bear in mind is you will only see different options inside here for the key that are associated or will work with the widget that you're using. So for example, if we put some image upload fields in here, we wouldn't see those referenced inside the key because we can't use those with a heading section, with a heading widget. So logic would dictate that you'll only see the relevant information you can pull in that's associated with the typical type of widget that you're working with. Okay, hope that makes sense. So what we're going to do is pull in manufacturer. Once we've done that, you can see that now pulls in Ford. Great. But what does Ford mean? You know, if someone's looking at this, it might mean absolutely nothing to them. Well, this is where the advanced options come in. So what we can do is we can put in something before. So let's just say we want to put manufacturer, and we put a full colon and a space. Give it a second or so, and you can see that now updates. If you wanted to put something else in there, like fallback, for example, so if a value wasn't inserted into this field, we'll just put in something like NA, so it's non-applicable. If you wanted to put something after, you could do that. So let's just say something. Give it a second or so, and you can see that now updates, and we'll put after what we put into the key, that puts that in there as well. So we can put before, we can put after, we can do pretty much whatever we want in there. And like I say, if we want to, we can use HTML code inside here. So if we wanted to make this bold, we could just wrap this in strong tags. However, like I say, we're not worried about that. So there's the first one we've done. So we've put in that ACF field. We've associated that with the relevant key field we want to use, all pretty simple and straightforward. So now we can just kind of repeat that same process again if we want to. So what we could say is we could duplicate this, which would be a quick way of doing it. We would only have to go in and just change what the value is for the key. So let's do that. Let's just right click and just say duplicate. And then we can come up here, we can click on the little wrench icon, we can change that from vehicle, and we can just change this to vehicle color. And we'll just change the before, and we'll put in color. Give that a second so, and there you go. We've now updated that information. So I'll repeat that again. So we just right click, duplicate, come to the little wrench icon, change that from color, we'll say vehicle engine. And we'll come in, change this to engine type. And there we go. So all very simple and straightforward. So the final one we've got then is the specifications. We're going to do this a little differently. We're going to come in and we're going to say, first of all, we want to put in a different heading inside there. So we can come into there and we'll just put in, we'll say specifications. That's the heading for that created. Now what we can do is we can come in and we'll say we want to put a text editor underneath there. So that's our different widget this time. But again, you can see we've got dynamic as an option. So we can click on dynamic, scroll right the way to the bottom, choose ACF field, click on the wrench icon, and we'll change the key to vehicle specifications. Give it a second or so, and you can see that now updates the specifications. So what you can see is the whole process isn't particularly complex. But now what we can do is we can go ahead and we can fine tune and we can adjust the styling on there. So we can say we want to bring this in and make it a bit more in keeping. So H1 is perfectly fine on there. So we'll come into our style settings. What we'll do is we'll set that to be a different color. We'll change our typography and we'll just put in, we'll choose quicksand for this example, and we'll just adjust the size on there. And what we can do is we can adjust the weight if we want to. We can set up any way that we want to do that. Now what I can do is I can just sort of copy that. I could duplicate and paste that style there, paste that style there, paste there, and paste there. So that'll just update the styling on there, and we can style this any way we want. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the whole styling options because when it comes to dealing with this, it's very subjective, but also very easy with Elementor. So we'll say that we're happy with this template, that everything is in place. We'll hit publish, and that now opens up some options for us. Now these options are just literally conditions for when and where we use this new template. Now we're keeping this really, really simple, so I don't want to go into too much detail. And like I say, I've covered this in its own dedicated tutorial, so I would definitely recommend taking a look at the theme builder tutorial if you want to learn more about that. What we're going to do is we can say we've got include or exclude, and then we can choose where we want to use it. So at the moment it says posts, and as you can see, if we expand that, we have lots of different options. Because we've only set up a really simple setup, posts is perfectly fine. What you can do then is you could say you want to assign this to all posts or to specific posts. Once we're happy with that, we'll say save and close, and we've now created our single post template that'll be referenced and used for our particular website. So let's come back out now to that test page that we started off with, and this is where we were first of all with the normal hello theme. Now if we refresh this page, we'll find there's our new design with all the details that we've just put in there. So the name of the vehicle, the details, the manufacturer, all those kinds of good things are used inside there. So that's how we go about creating the single post template. The next thing we're going to do is take a look at how we can create an archive template and make everything just a little bit neater and a little bit sleeker. At the moment, this is what our archive page looks like. As you can see, it doesn't really give too much information away and it doesn't look that good. So how do we go about sort of changing that and making it a little bit more stylish? Well, again, we're going to come back into Elementor. We're going to close out of our previous dashboard section. We're going to come into our template section again, and we're going to come in and say theme builder. And from there, we're going to just choose archive. So once we've done that, we're going to go through the same kind of process as we did last time to create the single post template. Add new. I'm going to call this default archive and say create template. That's going to load us into Elementor Pro Editor and also take us into the blocks and the pages section. So if we wanted to use one of the predefined, pre-designed layouts, we could do that. But again, I'd rather show you from scratch. So let's close this down. What we're going to do, you can see again, because we chose an archive, we now have the archive section available on the left-hand side. So this makes it really easy. What we're going to do is we're going to just pull in the archive posts and drop that in there. Now what that's going to do is that's going to use the normal default WordPress loop. And what that really means is it's just going to loop through all the different posts that you've got. And that'll display that inside here. And we then control various different aspects of this and styling options and so on. So you can see at the top, we've got skin as an option. So we can click on there and we can choose between classic and cards. So we can see cards, and you can see that now changes the design on there. If we want to, we can go through now and choose exactly what we do and don't want to show as part of this archive. So let's just say image is perfectly fine. We're going to choose the larger image because it looks a little better quality wise. Title is perfectly fine. We're going to come down. We're going to say we don't want to worry about comments and we don't want to worry about date. And you can see that now removes those from there in real time. Read more. We're going to get rid of that as well. The taxonomy is what you can see currently. It says uncategorized. So if you were using different categories, you could have those listed as part of this archive. We're going to turn those off, and we're going to turn the avatar off as well. So we've now got a really simple, clean looking setup for our archive page. I would recommend putting pagination on and enabling that just to make sure that when you get more vehicles or more posts on there, your user has some way of moving through to the next page of archive pages and so on and so forth. So we'll say, yeah, that's perfectly fine. We say numbers and previous and next. And again, if we want to, we can style that. Now you're not seeing anything because obviously there's nothing actually on here to see at the moment. So we'll say that we're happy with the way that looks. We'll say publish. And again, we're taken through to that condition section. So we'll say add a condition, and you can see pretty much works the same way, but obviously because we're dealing with an archive, then the condition that's going to be used is going to be slightly different. So at the moment it says all archives, and we click to expand that, you can see we have a different set of ways of going through and specifying exactly what archive this would be used on. Now for me, I'm perfectly fine with all archives, but obviously, like I say, if you wanted to go through and specify different ones for categories, for child categories and so on, or tags, you can do that inside here. And again, all these things are covered in a lot more detail in that tutorial that'll take you through and show you how to use the Elementor Pro Theme Builder. So we'll say all archives. We'll hit save and close, and we've now created our custom archive. So let's come back over to our website, and because we set this for all the archives, anything that uses an archive page will now use our custom built template. So let's click to refresh, and there's our custom template being used. If we click and go through, there's our custom template being used for the single post type. So we've now not only created custom archives and custom single post templates, we've also pulled in data from advanced custom fields, and we can keep on repeating that to create far more complex and comprehensive websites using just these basic skills. Now, before we wrap up this particular section, let's just come back into our editor. I'm going to close out of this, and I'll show you how easy it is just to set a header and a footer for your site. So again, inside the theme builder, we're going to come into there. We're going to choose header this time. say add new header. We're just going to call this default header and create our template. Once we've done that, we're going to use one of the predefined templates as part of Elementor. So just as a quick way of doing it, but if you wanted to create this from scratch, using all the normal tools inside Elementor and Elementor Pro, you can do just that. However, let's just keep this really simple and just choose a nice simple header. So we'll use this one and we'll say insert. That will then insert that into our page, and you can see it's now looking for a logo image and for our menus. We're not going to worry too much about that in a moment. We'll just hit publish. Add our conditions. So again, you can see it's all just repetitive. It's doing the same thing, setting the right conditions and so on. Entire site is perfectly fine, but again, you can see we can choose a different header for the entire site, for archives and for singular. We'll say entire site is perfectly fine and save and close. And that's now associated that header with every single page we create on our site. We'll do the same thing again. Now we'll exit out to our dashboard. Going to come in and we're going to say theme builder. And from there, we're going to say footer. And then say add new footer. So what we're going to do is come in and say default footer, create our template. We'll then choose our template we're going to use, the predefined template. And again, we'll just choose a nice dark simple layout. So we'll choose this one, insert that in. And then once we've done that, we'll hit publish, add our condition, entire site is perfectly fine. Hit save and close, and we are now done. So let's come back, take a look, refresh this, and we'll have our new header at the top, and scroll down our new footer at the bottom. So all we need to do now is go and set up things like the menu you want to use in there, add the logo into your site, and just do any kind of fine tuning to make sure you've got plenty of space around the various different elements and everything is looking really good. So I've gone ahead, tweaked a few bits and pieces, put a logo in, put some navigation in, and just style things out a little bit tidier and neater. So as you can see, what we've ended up with now is a nice simple way of being able to go and take a look at these vehicles, take a look at the details about them, and style anything we want and add anything we want in there. So that's the basics of working with advanced custom fields. But what if you want to take this further? What kinds of things can you do? Because at the moment, we can associate these custom fields with things like posts and pages. And that's kind of still limiting. Well, what you could do, and I'm not going to cover this in this particular video, I've already covered this in other videos, and if you want another sort of beginner's guide to use these kinds of things, let me know in the comment section below, and I'll create a second video that'll show you how you can utilize these extra tools. But what you can do is you can use a free plugin called Custom Post Type UI. That will then allow you to create custom post types. So for example, instead of using the posts for your vehicles, you could create a custom post type for vehicles, and then you could have those two separated. You could also then create another custom post type for manufacturer information and have different information for each of the manufacturers there. There's a real lot of scope of what you can do, and I covered this recently in a deep dive video where we took a look at creating a food blog, which used custom post type, custom loops, and a whole range of really cool things to create a much more bespoke website. So if you are looking to take this to the next level again and just add in extra functionality, Custom Post Type UI is definitely one of the best options to take a look at. Anyway, there are lots of different ways you can take these skills and these topics that we've covered in this particular video, but this should give you a good beginner's grounding in how you can use advanced custom fields alongside WordPress and Elementor Pro. Okay, so now we've gone way past the basics. We've catered for dynamic tags and advanced custom fields, and this should be getting you excited now for some of the things you can do. Now we're ready to move on to the next logical step, and that's working with custom post types. Now, custom post types is a great way of allowing you to go beyond what WordPress offers and start to create your own custom dynamic layouts, content, structure, and a whole range of really cool things. Now, what are the kind of use cases you could have for using something like advanced custom fields and custom post types? Well, what about job listing websites, retail websites, real estate websites, business listing websites, job boards? The range is almost endless. It's just your imagination and knowing how to use these tools. So by the end of this video, which wraps up the entire 5-part course, you should have an amazing foundation in taking Elementor, WordPress, advanced custom fields, and custom post types to create way more advanced websites. So without any further ado, let's just jump back into the dashboard of WordPress and start taking a look what custom post types can do for your web design. This is where we left off in the first video in this series. We've got the archive page that shows us the vehicles, and if we click to go and take a look, we can see all the dedicated information, the custom fields that we've added to those vehicle posts. Now this is pretty basic the way we did this in the first video, and it's a good introduction to what meta fields are and how we can use those with the default WordPress setup. So in other words, we're using this inside the post type. Now what we want to do in this video is take it to the next level where we start to introduce our own custom post types. Now you might be thinking, well, why would I want to create a custom post type? We're going to easily just go through and add in custom fields to the normal post type in WordPress. And if you have a very basic website with just a single topic, for example, you could be doing recipes, then that would probably work quite well. However, when you want to move beyond that and you may have multiple different kinds of categories, you may have cars, you may have lorries, you may have all manner of different kinds of post types. It starts to get just a little bit unwieldy when you try to shoehorn all of those into a typical post. So it's much better to use custom post types. And that's what we're going to do. So now that we've talked about what custom post types are, how do we go about actually creating our own custom post types with the website we're working on? Well, one of the nice things about WordPress is with the repository of all these plugins, there are tons of options available. And today we're going to be using a free plugin called Custom Post Type UI, or CPTUI. So what we're going to do is I've come into the plugin section, come into Add New, and we're simply going to search for Custom Post Type UI. And there we go, there's our plugin. So we're going to click on Install now. Let that download and install. Once that's finished installing, we'll activate it and we'll have a new entry then inside our WordPress dashboard. So let's activate that. Once that's activated, if we take a look on the left-hand side in our dashboard, we'll see we now have CPTUI. So this is going to give you an overview of what's available in the latest version. And as of recording this video, you can see version 1.71 is the latest version. So what do we actually start doing to use these custom post types? When we take a look on the left-hand side underneath the CPTUI section, you can see we have a range of different options we can choose from. We've got Add Edit Post Type, Add Edit Taxonomy, Register Types and Taxes, Tools, Help and Support, and About CPTUI, which is what we're currently looking at. Now for this video, we're only going to concentrate on the first two options. The first half of this video, we're going to take a look at custom post types, and then later on, we're going to take a look at taxonomies and explain what they are and how we can use those to better organize the custom post type content we're going to create. So let's start off with the Add Edit Post Types. Once we choose Add Edit Post Types, it brings us over into this dialog box, into this section. And as you can see, in much the same ways we had with advanced custom fields in the previous video, we've got things broken down into various different component parts. What we're going to take a look at today are the key things that you need to do. I'm not going to cover everything inside here because there are, as you can see, a heck of a lot of options. So let's start off at the top with the very first section, the basic section. So what we have in here is the post type slug, the plural label, the singular label, and auto-populate labels. So what we're going to do first of all is give this a slug. Now we're going to be dealing with vehicles. So we're going to just type in vehicles. Once you've done that, most important thing to remember here is whenever you're dealing with a slug, you need to make sure that you don't use spaces, capitals are ignored, and if you want to put a space in to separate something, you need to use either an underscore or the minus sign to create that separation. Next up, we have the plural label. So we're going to just type in vehicles inside there, and then the singular label is going to be vehicle. Now these are primarily really used for the dashboard. They don't really get used on the front end of the site too much, so don't worry too much about what you use on there. This is what you're going to see on this left-hand section when we actually have our new custom post type added in. So we could, if we wanted to, leave it there and we could add this post type and we'd have the very basic setup. However, there are still a couple of things that I want to go through and show you and a couple of settings that I want to change to make sure this works the way that we need it to. So let's scroll down to the additional labels section. Now the additional labels are completely optional. These are the kinds of things that are used inside the dashboard when you're going through and creating or adding in your custom posts. So in this example, the vehicles and so on. So you can see we've got post type description. So if you want to, if you have a more complex dashboard or you need to explain to the end user what this particular custom post type is for, you can drop in a description there. Then we have things like the menu name, all items, add new, and so on. These are ways of going through and not using the default values that WordPress will assign to your custom post type. So if you want to fine tune and tweak these, you can do. They're all pretty self-explanatory and you can't do any harm by adding in any values in there. You can simply come back in, edit your post type, and delete any of the values you don't want. What we do want to look at though are the settings section. You can see we've got quite a lot of options available to us inside here, and this might look really daunting if you've never seen this before. But the nice thing with this is there's a lot of these options you don't need to make any changes to whatsoever. So if you're unsure, you can test it out. You can see if it does what you want it to or expect it to. If it does, then you can leave it. If you want to set it back, you can simply come in and edit your post type. Nothing you do inside here when you set up your custom post types is irreversible. You can simply come in and change anything you want. So we want to do things like we want this to be public. We want it to be queryable. So in other words, if we apply a search filter later on, we want this to be something that can be searched against. And also things like show UI, show nav names, and so on. So you could see we could delete this with the user. We don't want to do something like that, but the option's there if you wanted to. What we want to change though are a couple of different values. So we say has archive. Now at the moment this is set to false, and the problem with that is if we leave that set as false, we won't have an archive available to us to display the vehicles. We don't have control over that, especially when we're working with the theme builder inside Elementor Pro. So we need to make sure that in this example, if you want to create your custom archives, that you set that to be true. Next up, you can see we've got exclude from search. We're going to leave that as is. The capability type. Now, as you know, or you should know, whenever you're working with WordPress, straight out of the box, you've got a couple of different sort of types of post types. You've got posts, you've got pages, you've got media, and so on. So what you can do is you can set the capability, and it will take those basic capabilities from that post type inside WordPress and assign that to your default values inside your new custom post type. Might sound a little complicated, but for most examples, you're going to leave that set as post because we are creating a custom post type, not a custom page or a custom media or anything like that. So we're going to leave that value set to post. Then we've got hierarchical. Now, hierarchical basically means, can we structure this in hierarchy? So for example, can we have parent and child values? So we may say we wanted to put vehicles in, and that would be the parent, and underneath that we could then break it down into child components, which could be things like motorbikes, cars, lorries, vans, and so on. So there's a hierarchy in there. Depending upon the kind of information you're putting in and your custom post type you're creating, this may be something you want to set to false or to true. Entirely up to you. We're going to say we want to set this to true so we could expand it if we wanted to in the future. We're going to use most of the default values for everything else. We're going to come down there and you can see it says show in menu. We want to make sure this shows up in our menu on the left hand side. And we can say what position do we want this to be placed in. So if we set that to position 1, what will happen is that'll put that right at the top of our options on the left hand side. So you can position that where you want. And you can see we've got a range from 5 to 100 or whatever you kind of want to do. Show in menu, that means will it show it in this new section at the top where you've got inside the dashboard where you can go in and say new post, new media, new page, and so on. And also if you have this value, this bar available to the user on the front end, it will also be available inside there. I'm going to leave that set to true even though I don't really use it myself personally. Then we've got the menu icon, and what we can do is we can use dash icons to create a custom icon and use that inside the dashboard to separate our different custom post types. By default, you'll have this little pin, but you can, if you want, to use the dash icons and use those completely free of charge to give yourself a little bit more of a unique kind of look. If we click on dash icons, you can see that'll take us over, and you can see we can now go through and search on here for anything we want. So if we were looking for cars or vehicles or anything, we can find an icon we think is relevant to us, and then we can utilize that inside our dashboard. So let's just say we like the look of this one, this little speedometer. All we need to do is take this value dash icons performance, we'll copy that from there, come back over into our custom post type, and we're simply going to paste that value inside there. That now allows us to use that. If we wanted to, we could choose an image icon, so we could click on anything we've uploaded previously. We could use that as well if we wanted to. Next up, we've got the supports option. Now, when we covered in the advanced custom fields portion of this, the first video, I took you through and showed you we can use default tools or default functions inside our post type editor as part of WordPress. And those included things like the title, the editor, the featured image, and so on. The same works with our custom post types. So we're going to leave title, editor, and featured image selected because we want to use those as part of our new post type. And then we want to add on extra fields on top of it. So we're going to leave those values as they are. Then we're going to come down, you can see we've got custom supports, which we're going to leave those completely empty. And then taxonomy. So if we wanted to, we could associate any of the built-in taxonomies that's part of WordPress with this new custom post type. For this example, we don't want to utilize those. We're simply going to keep it to all the things that we've set up, just making sure that everything is in place. And then we're going to click on add post type. And then what you're going to find is, if we take a look on the left-hand side, we now have a new entry called Vehicles. And if we click into All Vehicles, that will show us what we'd normally expect to see, which is a list of the vehicles in our custom post type. So we've created our custom post type, all ready to start assigning or changing over the custom field values that we want to assign to this particular post type. So we take a look now at our new custom post type. We'll see that it basically is a very, very simple post type. We've got three things we can do. We've got the vehicle name, the description or the details, and the featured image. So the key things you'd normally expect to see inside any kind of post type with WordPress. So the next thing we need to do is create or assign our custom fields. So we're going to come to the custom field section. We're going to take a look at our field groups. Now, instead of going through and recreating all these again, we've already covered that in the first video, so I'm not going to go over the old ground. What I am going to do is come into these details, and we're going to reassign these to a different location. So where we previously set those up to be part of just a normal post type, you can see there's our location. Post type is equal to post. We're going to change that. This is one of the nice things about working with tools like Advanced Custom Fields. You can test things out, make sure they work the way you want, and then you can add other things in, and then you can reassign where you want to use those particular field groups. So what we're going to do, it says post type is equal to post. We just need to change that now to be used with our new custom post type. This is super easy. Post type is equal to, and we just change from post, and we come down and we choose vehicle, because that's our new custom post type. So now everything else can be left intact. All the settings are exactly the same. So all we're going to do is update this. And when that's updated, we're simply going to come back over into our vehicle section, come down, we'll choose add new. And from there, you can now see that all those details that we created in the previous video inside Advanced Custom Fields are all now available to us inside our new custom post type. So let's go ahead and just create our first vehicle, just so we can see how the whole process works. So we're just going to call this TT Roadster. So it's a different name to the first one. So we drop in some text inside there, choose a featured image, and we'll just choose the TT image, set that as our featured image. Vehicle manufacturer, we're going to say it's Audi. Vehicle color is red. Petrol type is perfectly fine, and we're going to say that's the specifications for it. So let's just add that in a second time there, so we've got a little bit more text. So we've put everything we need now into our new custom post type. We can hit publish on there, and then we've now got our first post type all set underneath our vehicles. So really straightforward thing to do. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a couple more vehicles, and then I'm going to take you on to the next stage. There we go. I've now added an extra vehicle in this. We've got a couple of vehicles to work with as we're going through and fleshing out this particular video. So we've seen how to create our custom post type and how to assign custom fields to it. This is perfectly fine if you want to create a fairly simplistic setup. However, when you want to get a little bit more sort of structured, it makes a lot more sense to start adding in some way of grouping your content together. Whether that's based upon something like the fuel type, or it could be something like the manufacturer. It could be any number of different things in any number of different scenarios. But we need to have a way of to group things together just to structure our information a lot more logically for both ourselves and for the end user that's visiting our site. Well, Custom Post Type UI gives us another option we can use to do just that. Now, if you're used to working with post types inside WordPress, you're probably used to dealing with things like categories and tags. Now, these are called taxonomies. And taxonomies are just ways of grouping your posts, whether that's a custom post type or a normal post type inside WordPress itself, how we can group those together into logical groupings. So what we're going to do is we're going to come to the custom post type UI again. This time we're going to choose add edit taxonomy. So once we do that, that'll open up the taxonomies option, and you can see there are some things that are the same as when we create a post type, but there's also some things that are going to be different. So we're going to create a first taxonomy. Now you can create as many of these as you want to logically group and order your information. I just want to show you one, but the routine procedure is exactly the same if you want to do it again and again and again. So let's kick this off by putting the taxonomy slug in, and this again works in exactly the same way as when you're creating a custom post type. No spaces, no capital letters. So this one is going to be grouping our cars or our vehicles by manufacturer. Next up, the plural label. So we're just going to drop in manufacturer and add the S on there, and then manufacturer for the singular. So we've created our taxonomy, we've given it the plural and the singular labels. Next thing we've got then is attached to post type. And if you remember back when I said we were creating our custom post type, we could, if we wanted to, associate that custom post type with some of the built-in taxonomies that we have as part of WordPress. This allows you to do the same kind of thing, or we can now attach it to the post type that we want to associate it with, which in our example, the vehicles. So you can see we've got things like posts, pages, media, and so on, and they've got WP core in parenthesis, and that basically means that's WordPress core functionality, not something we've created or not something that's part of a third-party plugin like Elementor Pro, which gives us my templates. So we want to use vehicles. We're going to add that in there. So we now say we've associated that with our custom post type of vehicles. It knows where we're going to use that. Next up, we've got the additional labels, and this works in fundamentally exactly the same way as what we had when we create our custom post types. So again, if you want to put values in there, you can do. If you want to leave them as they are, that's also perfectly fine. Next up, we have the settings section, and again, we need to make some changes in here to make sure that it works in the way that we want it to. You can read through these. It gives you information about each one, and again, if you make a change and it doesn't do what you expect it to, you can come back in and edit your taxonomy and change any values that you set up. What we want to do though is we want to set again to hierarchical. So we're going to say true for that. And we're going to come down and we're just going to make sure everything else is set the way we want. So it says rewrite hierarchical, show admin column, and so on. So we're going to say we want to rewrite the hierarchical. We also want to show admin column. Now this is a nice little feature that if you look at when we created a vehicle, first of all we had was the title and the date that we created it, which is okay, but it doesn't really give us a lot of information. However, when we create our custom taxonomies, we can specify that that's going to be shown inside the dashboard of the admin for our custom post type. And I'll demonstrate that in a moment. So we're going to say we want to set this to true. Once we've done that, we can come down and make any changes we want inside here. You can see we've got show in quick bulk edit panel. Again, this is one of those things that's very, very useful, and I'll show you what that does once we've created our taxonomy. So we're going to set that value to true as well, and then we're just going to say add taxonomy. Now once we've done that, because we've associated this with our vehicles custom post type, if we come out to vehicles in the top left hand corner, you see we now have a new option called manufacturers. However, if we go to posts, we don't see that in there. The same for pages or media or anything else. It's only associated with our custom post type of vehicles. So let's just jump in and take a look at all vehicles a moment. Now, you can see we've got what we had previously, which was the title, the name of the vehicle, and the date it was added. But we now have manufacturers inserted in there because we specified we wanted that to be inside the dashboard, inside our admin. We also have the option, if we come in and take a look at the quick edit and open that up, we have the option inside there for manufacturers. Now currently we don't have any manufacturers to choose from, but when we do, we can associate those with any of our posts. So it's a nice quick way of being able to bulk edit or update anything you want by adding that into your dashboard. Okay, so now that we've created that taxonomy and we've set up all the settings that we want, let's take a look at actually adding in some values. So all we need to do is come out to manufacturers, we can click on there, we can now add in some manufacturers. So we know we've got a Ford in there, we know we've got an Audi in there, so let's just say add a new Ford. We'll add Audi, there we go, and we'll add one more, we'll just say BMW, and we'll add that. So we've now got some values. So if we come back out to our vehicles and say all vehicles, if we wanted to, we could now select these vehicles, we can come to bulk actions and say edit and apply, and now we have the manufacturers as an option inside there. So if we wanted to, we could bulk edit things on here. However, because we only have two vehicles, it's not going to work for us in this instance. But what we can do is we're just going to come into the Focus ST. We'll click inside there. And now if we take a look on the right-hand side, we've got our new taxonomy section for manufacturers. So that basically means that this section for vehicle manufacturer is no longer actually needed. So what we can do is we can get rid of that. First of all, let's simply go through and say that this is a Ford. So we're going to select that and update. And then we'll do exactly the same thing for our Audi. And we'll just choose Audi from there and hit update. So we've now created a taxonomy and we've done away with the need for this vehicle manufacturer. So what we can do now is simply come to the custom fields into our field groups, open up our vehicle details, and from there we can now scroll down and find any values that we don't want. So we've got the vehicle manufacturer is no longer needed, so we can simply delete that from there and say, yep, we want to get rid of it. We'll update that now. Come back to our vehicles and take a look at all our vehicles. And just open up one of those to edit it, and you'll now see that we no longer have that value inside there because we've started to organize our data in a much more logical fashion using our taxonomies. So now that we've created a custom post type, the template we created in the previous video is now pretty much useless to us. So what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of that and we're going to create a new template specific to our vehicle post type. So let's come into our templates and come down to our theme builder. Once we're inside there, you can see we've got default archive. So what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of that. So we're just going to delete that, we're going to drop it into the bin, and we're going to create a new one. So we're going to say add new. From there, we're going to choose an archive, and then we're going to call this default vehicle archive. Okay, so we're going to say create our template, and we can go through the same process that we had the first time. But the difference is we're going to set up a different condition for how we're going to display this information. So what we're going to do is going to close this down, and we're simply going to drop in and create our own custom archive. So let's drag our archive widget over, drop that on there, and we're simply going to come in and add a little bit of space above and below, just so we've got a bit of breathing room. And as you can see, it says, well, we can't find what you're looking for. And the reason being is because it's looking for just a default post type inside WordPress. Now, I've already gone ahead and deleted the vehicles we created in the previous video that were just part of the normal posts inside WordPress. So we now need to tell it what we want to use and what we want to display. So first thing we're going to do is come into the little settings cog in the bottom left-hand corner of Elementor. Click on there, and then we've got preview settings. Click on preview settings, and you can see it says recent posts. What we want to do is come down and choose vehicles archive. Now, it knows because we've created this new custom post type and we've assigned it to have archives inside the custom post type UI settings, it allows us to actually use that as a reference to display data. So we're going to choose a vehicles archive, hit apply and preview, and after a second or two, we should find there's our new vehicles that we've added in or pulled in from our custom post type. So we've now created those, we've pulled that information in, so all looking pretty good. And as we did in the previous video, we can come in and fine tune and tweak the various different parameters, the design and so on. So we can say we can do all those kinds of things, and that's looking perfectly fine. I'll leave that as is. We're going to hit publish. That's going to take us back into our add conditions option. And this time we're going to set a different condition to what we did in the first example in the previous video. Add condition, and it says all archives, which is not what we wanted to do. Now, you could use this if you didn't intend to have any other kind of custom post types. You could have just signed this template to every single archive that may ever be used inside your design. However, if you were dealing with multiple different custom post types, each of those post types may need to have a different archive design. But we can do that inside Elementor Pro's theme builder. All we need to do where it says all archives is click on there, and you can see because we've created that vehicle archive, we now have additional options specific to the vehicles archive. Before, we only had post archive. Now we can use the vehicle archive. So what we're going to do is we're going to say vehicle archive. That's what we want to do. We're going to use that, and we're going to set that up to be the right kind of condition for this. We're going to say save and close. We've now created our custom archive with a template or design that's specific to that custom post type. I hope that makes sense. Once we've done that, we now have finished with that section, so we can simply come out of this, exit to our dashboard, and we've now created our archive page. So let's take a look at this in action. So to make this easy to find, what we're going to do is we're going to come out of this, exit to our dashboard, and we're going to come into our appearance section and come down to menus. And here we're going to create a new menu item specific for the template or the archive template we've just created. To do that, all we need to do is come to custom links. Inside here, we're going to get rid of all this, and we're just simply going to put in vehicles with a / at the beginning and the end. And next, we're going to say view vehicles. Now, let me explain where we get this information from. Why do we know, or how do we know that the URL is vehicles? Well, let's come back over to our custom taxonomies, and we created our custom post type, and we named it with the post slug vehicles, as you can see here. So that slug is the unique link to go to that particular post type and use the archive that we just created. With that in place, we're going to say add to menu, let that add that in there and save our menu. Then we can jump over to our test site and take a look. So let's come over to our test site. We'll visit our site and we take a look at the top. There's view vehicles. We're going to click on there and that'll take us through, and there's our new custom archive using the design we've just set up, all created using custom post types and custom taxonomies and so on. We click and go and take a look inside there. We've now still got that default kind of layout, which isn't what we necessarily want. So we need to change that and rectify that. Now, because we'd already created this single post template that displays all of that custom post data, we can reference that quite easily. So what we can do is we can come back into our template section, into our theme builder, and from there, we're going to go into our default single template again. So we're going to go in, edit with Elementor, and once we're inside there, all we really need to do is change where it pulls the data from. So all the information is ready for us. All the template layout is there ready for us. What we need to do is come down to the save options, click on there, and we can update our display conditions. Click on display conditions, and from there we can now go through and choose what we want to use to display this data. Now by default we see we've got the previous settings, which is to include posts and all of them, which isn't what we want. So what we need to do is choose the first option, and from there you can see we've got vehicles, which is our custom post type. We're going to say vehicles, and then we're going to leave that set to all. So this is now going to use any of the data pulled from our vehicles custom post type and display that. Hit save and close. Once we've done that, we can simply exit out of this, exit to our dashboard. When we've done that, we can come back over to our test site. We come back in and visit our site. We'll come in and view our vehicles. There's our new custom archive page. And if we click and take a look at our TT, we'll go in and you can see there's the data that we wanted all pulled in ready for us. So everything is looking the way we'd expect it to. We haven't had to go back in and create everything. But if you were doing this from scratch, I'd highly recommend you take a look at the first video where I go over through exactly how you set all these details up to display everything that you want to. Now, if we come back to our archive page and take a look at this, it doesn't really do any justice to what we're creating. In other words, we've got the vehicle picture, the name of it, and then some description information, but it doesn't tell us any more than that. You've got to click to go into the actual vehicle details and see exactly what's available. So for example, the things like the color, the engine, and any other information we want to create as part of our meta fields. Well, there's got to be a better way of doing that. And there is. However, we can't do that with Elementor Pro alone. We need to have another plugin. Now this is a free plugin again, so it gives us the ability to go in and create custom loops. Now before we jump in and take a look at what that plugin is, let me just explain what we're going to be doing. If we take a look at this screen in front of us, the archive, we are effectively using the WordPress loop. Now, if you consider the loop to just be to repeat information on screen and loop it a set number of times per page. So let's just say you set up WordPress to have 9 vehicles per page, and then you'll go to the next page for another 9 and so on. That's displaying the loop. Now, each one of these individual items is part of that loop. So what we're going to create is we're going to create one of these individual items. We're going to create the template to display that. Then we're going to utilize that inside the WordPress loop to repeat it. So it's just going to replace the look of this with the data that we want to pull in. And that's all it's really doing. So don't worry too much about the technical aspects behind it. So when I'm talking about the WordPress loop, that's what I'm talking about, where it just repeats those entries one after another a set number of times for each individual page. Okay, so let's come back over into our dashboard. We're going to come back into our plugin section. We're going to come down to add new. From there, we're going to do a search for LE Custom Skin. Now there is a pro version of this available, but you don't need that to do what we're going to cover in this particular video. So once we found that, you can see Elementor Custom Skin, we're going to install that. Once that's installed, we can now go through and take a look at how we can start to use it. So let's activate that. And as you can see, it's got over 10,000 active installs and a 5-star rating. So it is a great plugin. And like I say, the free version does more than we needed to. So get rid of any of these nag messages on there. And we're going to come back into our templates, into our theme builder. And you'll see we now have a new entry called loop. So we now can create those templates that we use as part of our custom loop. Click to come into the loop option, and you can see in the same way we'd expect with any of the templates inside Elementor Pro, we're going to say add new. From there, we're going to give this a name, and we're going to call this default vehicle loop. We'll click to create our template, and then we'll go into the normal Elementor editor. We haven't any templates selected for this, so we're going to just close that down. So we're going to now start creating the various different aspects. You can see we've got the single post icons available to us on the left hand side, so we can start to use those if we want to and pull in the various little pieces of data that we've got as part of a typical post. Let's create our first loop then. First thing I'm going to do is come down to our settings section, and from there I'm going to change this template. Now even though it won't use this, we just want to get rid of it just to make sure that we don't have any distractions when we're creating things. So at the moment, page layout is set to default. We're going to set this to Elementor Canvas to get rid of that header and footer. Once we've done that, come to the preview settings, and you can see we can pull in what dynamic data do we want to use. I'm going to click on there. We're going to just choose vehicle, and all is perfectly fine. So we'll say apply and preview. And that will then give us the ability to now use the actual data from one of our vehicles when we're building out this layout. So there's our vehicle already inserted in there for us. We can change any of the values we want to on here. So you've got the image size and so on. So we can set the alignment on there, change the image size. We'll set that to medium large because we don't need it to be sort of full width. That's going to be a little bit too big and also slow down the page load. The link, we're going to set this. We want this to go through and take you through to the vehicle. So all we need to do is click on link. We say custom URL. And from there, we can click on the dynamic icon. Now, if you remember back to the previous video where we took a look at ACF and how we could start using dynamic data, this just opens up the opportunity to start using various different features inside either advanced custom fields or WordPress itself and use those where we need them to. So for this, we're going to say we want this to go through to the post URL. So that means if we click it, it'll take you through and you can view the vehicle. Next, let's come back out of this and we're going to say we want to put in the actual post title. So we can say what vehicle it is, click on there. See, TT Roadster, we'll change that to a smaller heading. And if we want to, we can come in and easily style this then any way that we want to, just to make sure that everything sits nice and neat and tidy in our design. And we'll just say uppercase, there we go. So what we can do now is we can simply pull in anything that we want to. So let's say we want to do something like pull in the manufacturer. Now the manufacturer, if you remember, isn't part of the custom post type. It's its own separate taxonomy. So how do we reference that? Well, we can do exactly that. We're going to just drag and drop in this text editor field. Now you can use any of the other fields. You can use headings if you wanted to. It's entirely up to you. It all comes down to just how you want to format that data afterwards. Click on dynamic. And in there, we've got a lot of different options. What we want to choose is post terms. So I'm going to click on there. That now just pulls in the ability to use a post term, but we've got to tell Elementor what we want to use, what post term it is we want to use. Click on the little wrench icon, and from there you can see we've got taxonomy. Click and expand. We've got the default ones you'd expect with WordPress, categories and tags. We also have manufacturers, which is the custom taxonomy that we've created. So we're going to click on that, and you can see that immediately pulls in Audi. Going to come down to advanced, and we're just going to put in before manufacturer, and we'll put a full colon and a space, and we can now see that we've pulled in that relevant data. So that's pretty cool. Now there's another thing that we have that's part of this LE custom skin. It's a new option we have when you use that and you have that installed. Normally, if you try to add in an excerpt, you either have the option for post excerpt, which is, as you would expect, the custom or the meta field that you have as part of a post type, which is post excerpt. So it's another field that you'd have to fill out. It's not always the best way of doing things. However, let's just pull in this text editor again, drop that in there. Come back over and choose dynamic, and you'll see we have a new entry called post summary. This is specific to Elementor custom skin. And what this will do is, in the same way you'd expect it to when you create a normal post and you use the normal archive loop, you'll have a brief section underneath that'll pull it from the description of your post. This is doing exactly the same thing, but it now works alongside our custom post types. So with that in place, we can come up with the style tab. We can set any values we want inside there, the content, all those kinds of things. And if we expand this out, you can see we have the option for the number of characters or words that we want to use. And again, we also have advanced. So we could say if we wanted to, we could put in, we'll just put in a little bit of HTML code and we'll say description, full colon, and we'll just close that HTML code down just so it makes that little bit more bold at the beginning, so you can see now it makes a bit more sense. So that looks pretty good. I like the look of that. And then finally what we could do is we can, if we wanted to, come back out of this and say we wanted to drop in a button into there. So we just scroll down, find a button, drop that underneath there, and what we can do is now we can start using dynamic data on here as well. So we could, if we wanted to, change the text from there and use anything from here. So let's just say we want to pull in the details of the name of the car, the actual vehicle itself. So what we're going to do is say post title, and you see it says TT Roadster. Click on the little wrench icon and come down to the before and after, and we can just put in view for a space and after space and then details. So we now have a custom button that'll pull in the dynamic information from the post title and sit in between the words view and details. So it makes a much more sort of obvious button as to what's going on. Next up, we need to put a link in there, and what we're going to do is going to click on the dynamic option again, and we're just going to say post URL in exactly the same way we did with the vehicle picture. Okay, so we've now created our basics of this particular loop item, this template for the loop. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit update on there, Save and close because we don't want to apply any conditions to it. We've now created that. We can now go through and tell it where to use it. So I'm going to come out of this, exit to our dashboard. I'm going to come back into our theme builder. Once we're inside our theme builder, we're going to go back into our default vehicle archive. Edit that with Elementor. Now you'll remember when we created this, we just used the normal archive widget, which is, again, like I say, perfectly fine, but it uses only a couple of different layouts that are predefined and we have no control. However, just selecting that now, look under the skin section and click and open that up. We now have a fourth option called custom. If we choose the custom option, that'll open up a range of different options that are only available when you have Elementor custom skin installed. So the first thing we have is select the default template. In other words, select the template we've just created that we want to use. Click. There's our default vehicle loop. Click on there and you see that now pulls in the design that we've just created. Now the options underneath are for the Pro version, so you can see they're all locked. We can't actually access those. So if you want those, you're going to have to go for the Pro version. However, like I say, you don't need it. You can use it as it is and it'll still do a fantastic job of allowing you to create a custom loop template. You can choose the number of columns you want. You can set this to be 2 if you wanted to, 3, 4, whatever you kind of want on there. But this gives us a lot more option. As you can see, we now have a template that's used inside our custom archive loop, which gives us the ability to pull in any data that we want, style it any way we want, and then make it a much more unique layout. So now if we jump over to our test page, you can see there's our layout, there's our custom loop. You can see we can click on the image to go through to the vehicle details, or we can click on the button to go through to the vehicle details as well. Now when you use custom post type UI alongside Elementor custom skin and advanced custom fields and Elementor Pro, you have an incredibly powerful platform to be able to develop and build much more unique WordPress websites without relying upon additional plugins on top of that to do various different things. Just gives you a great solid foundation to be able to do a lot more with WordPress. Well, that was a pretty long video. Hopefully what you've seen though is that there are tons of possibilities to take Elementor from the very basics right the way through, learning all the core skills and expanding that way beyond what you thought you could probably do using WordPress and Elementor. Has this whet your appetite? If it has, there are tons more great videos on this channel that are going to take you even further into dynamic content and using these tools together to create amazing websites. There's a playlist in the description below, so if you want to take a look at that and carry on your learning, by all means, please do. Now, all of the applicable links for everything I've covered in this entire series are all down in that description alongside timestamps for every stage throughout this entire series. Hopefully what you've seen though is this is a really exciting platform to work with. Anyway, if you have any comments, questions or feedback on anything I've covered in this video, remember you can drop this in the comment section below, or I would recommend joining the Facebook group, links in the description. That's going to be a fantastic place for you to share with like-minded individuals, get help, support, ideas. It's just a generally nice place to be. Anyway, my name has been Paul C. This has been WP Tuts, and until next time, take care.